Joshua leads into Canaan, Joshua 1 through 5. God spoke to Joshua, saying, Moses, my servant, is dead. Therefore cross the Jordan River, you and all the people, and take the land which I have given you. I will be with you all the days of your life, as I was with Moses. I will not fail you, nor forsake you. Be strong and of good courage, to do all the law. You will give this people possession of the land which I promised to give to your fathers. The tribes of Reuben, Gad, and Manasseh were given the land on the east side of the Jordan. God told these tribes to leave their wives and children behind in safety while they helped the others take the land on the west side of the river. Joshua sent 2 men ahead into Jericho. He told them, Spy out the country, especially the fortified city of Jericho, which will be the first city we will destroy. The men looked over the city, then asked to spend the night in Rahab's house, which was located on one of the city walls. The king of Jericho found out the men were there. He sent soldiers to capture them, but Rahab quickly hid them on her roof under some stalks of flax. She told the soldiers, Yes, the men were here, but they have already left. They went out the city gates just before they were shut. If you hurry, you can catch them. The soldiers left, and Rahab went onto her rooftop. She told the spies, I know God has given you this land. The people of Canaan are all afraid, because we heard about how God dried up the Red Sea for you, and how you destroyed King Sihon and King Og. There is no spirit left in any man to fight you. They are all afraid, for the Lord your God, He is God in heaven above and on earth below. Now please remember my kindness to you, and save my family. Go now, and hide in the hills until they quit looking for you. The 2 spies promised to make sure she was safe. She let them down the wall by a rope. The spies said, Gather your family in your house, and tie a scarlet cord out your window to mark it. Anyone in the house with you will not be killed in the upcoming battle. The spies hid in the hills for 3 days before returning to Joshua. Joshua gathered the people to cross the Jordan, which was flooded. The priest carrying the ark went first. As soon as their feet touched the water of the Jordan, the river stopped flowing as if a giant dam had blocked it, heaping the water up for miles behind. The priest stopped in the middle of the river on dry ground and stood there while the entire nation crossed. God started the exodus from Egypt with a miracle of parting the Red Sea. Now He started the conquest of Canaan with a similar miracle. This helped give the Israelites boldness to do God's will. Once the people crossed over, Joshua told 1 man from each tribe, Take a stone from the middle of the river where the priests stand, and carry it to where you will stay tonight. Also set up 12 other stones in the middle of the river where the priests are standing. When the priests left the riverbed, the waters returned, flooding the banks again. When the people of Canaan heard how God dried up the Jordan for Israel, their courage died, and they were even more afraid. As a memorial to their crossing of the Jordan, Joshua set up the 12 river stones at Gilgal, their first camp in Canaan. There they observed the Passover. The Israelites could now eat the crops of the fields that they passed through, so God stopped giving them manna. Joshua conquers Jericho, Joshua 5 through 8. Joshua saw a man standing near him with a sword in his hand. Joshua said, Are you friend or foe? The man replied, I have come as the commander of the army of the Lord. Joshua worshipped him, and the commander said, Take off your shoes, for the ground where you stand is holy, which means set apart for God. The commander was probably the Lord Jesus, for angels and other beings are not to be worshipped. The commander explained God's 7-day battle plan for conquering the mighty city of Jericho. Although it was a strange way to conquer a city, the children of Israel followed his instructions. The priests carried the Ark of the Covenant around the city of Jericho 1 time each day for 6 days. In front of the ark, 7 priests carried 7 trumpets of ram's horns and blew them continually. The men of war went in front of the priest, and a rear guard followed behind the ark. No one was allowed to say a word, for Joshua had commanded the people, saying, "You will not shout, nor let your voice be heard, nor let a word come out of your mouth, until the day I tell you, 'Shout!' Then you will shout." On the seventh day they marched around the mighty walls of Jericho 7 times. Then the trumpets blew a long blast, and Joshua ordered everyone, "Shout, for the Lord has given you the city." The people shouted, and the priests blew the trumpets, and the walls fell down flat. Then God's people went into the city and conquered it. The people of Jericho, being very wicked, were completely destroyed. Only Rahab and her family were spared, because she hid the spies and had faithfully kept the scarlet cord hanging out her window. This was God's victory, and all the silver and gold and bronze and iron was to go into God's treasury. The Israelites were told to take absolutely nothing for themselves, but Achan, of the tribe of Judah, secretly took a nice cloak, some gold, and 200 shekels of silver. He hid them under his tent. Next, the children of Israel attacked the little city of Ai, but the Israelites were chased away by a small group of defenders. 36 Israelite soldiers were killed, and the rest barely escaped with their lives and returned to camp. Joshua asked God, "What is wrong? Why have you deserted us? We will all be killed, and you will have no children left." God said, "There is sin in the camp. They have kept things for themselves. I cannot be in the midst of sin. Cleanse yourselves. Cast lots, and I will show you the man." The lot fell to Achan, who confessed. He was put to death along with his family. So God was able to be with Israel and help them again, and Israel conquered Ai easily. The conquest of Canaan, Joshua 9 through 24. Israel's victories over Jericho and Ai frightened all the rest of the kings of the land of Canaan. They gathered together to fight against Joshua and Israel, but there was one exception. A group of Gibeonites arrived at the Israelites' camp, clad in worn-out clothes and carrying stale bread. They said, "We are from a far-off country and want to make a covenant of peace with you. We will be your servants." Instead of asking God about them, Joshua and the other leaders went ahead and agreed to let the Gibeonites live. Then they found out that they had been tricked. The people of Gibeon owned the very land they camped on and would have been the next city to be destroyed. Angry over the enemy's lies and tricks, but bound by his agreement before God, Joshua made the Gibeonites wood choppers and water carriers. 5 kings of Canaan heard about the covenant between Gibeon and Israel. Angry, they attacked Gibeon. Joshua and the Israelites marched all night to make a surprise attack against the 5 kings and their armies. God rained large hailstones upon the enemy, killing more soldiers with the hail than the Israelites killed with swords. God also helped Israel win by having the sun and moon stand still until Israel had time to win the battle in daylight. God did this simply in answer to a prayer by Joshua. There was never a day like that before it or after it. God continued to give Joshua and the Israelites victory after victory. In all, Joshua conquered 31 kings and their cities, and the land had peace. Good had triumphed over wickedness. God fulfilled his promise to Abraham to give the land of Canaan, the promised land, to his descendants, the 12 tribes of Israel. Joshua divided the land among the Israelites, each tribe getting a specific area as an inheritance. He also named 6 cities of refuge, where a person who had innocently killed someone could flee. The Levites, however, were not given land, but were given cities. Because they were ministers to God, they could eat certain parts of the offerings given to God. Also, the other tribes were to give them 1/10 of their harvest every 3 years. Before Joshua died, he warned the people to continue obeying God, or God would remove them just as he had removed the evil people who used to live in Canaan. Joshua died at the age of 110, and they buried him. They also buried Joseph's body in Shechem, in the land Jacob had bought those many years before.
Othniel, Ehud, and Shamgar. Judges 1 through 4. After Joshua died, the Israelites finished conquering the land, but they did not completely drive out the Philistines and other peoples as God had told them to do. These evil people were allowed to stay in Canaan and became like thorns in the Israelites' sides, and their idols became traps to Israel. The people of Israel married the daughters of the evil people and started to worship their gods. The generation that crossed the Jordan River died. Another generation grew up and worshipped Baal, a Canaanite idol. Therefore God let the king of Mesopotamia put the people into bondage for 8 years. Then the people remembered God and prayed to him for help. God sent Othniel, the son of Caleb's younger brother, to save them. Othniel took an army against Mesopotamia and won. The land had rest for the 40 years that Othniel judged Israel. After the death of Othniel, the children of Israel again did evil and forgot God. So God sent Eglon, the king of Moab, against them. They had to serve Eglon 18 years. When the Israelites finally remembered God and cried out to him for help, he sent Ehud, a Benjamite, a left-handed man. Ehud went to Eglon and said, "I have a secret message from God to you." So King Eglon sent all his guards away and stood up to get the secret message. Ehud thrust his sword into the king, who was so fat the fat closed around the blade, completely hiding it. Ehud then calmly walked out, locked and shut the doors, and left. The king's servants waited outside the king's chamber, not wanting to disturb him. Their delay gave Ehud time to escape. Ehud then gathered an army and killed around 10,000 Moabites. The land had peace for the next 80 years. When the Israelites disobeyed God and went into slavery again, they were freed by Shamgar, the third judge, who killed 600 Philistines with an ox goad.
Deborah and Barak. Judges 4 through 5. After Ehud and Shamgar died, the children of Israel quit obeying God again. This time, God put them into the hands of Jabin, king of Canaan, who oppressed them for 20 years. Jabin's army had 900 chariots of iron, and the captain of his army was named Sisera. The Israelites finally turned back to God, crying for help. Deborah, a prophetess, judged Israel at that time. She sat under the palm tree of Deborah in the hill country of Ephraim, and the men of Israel came to her to settle their disagreements. One day she sent for Barak and told him, "Gather 10,000 men and go to Mount Tabor. God will send Sisera with his chariots and soldiers to the river Kishon. You can destroy them there." Barak said, "If you will come with me, I will go, but if you won't, I won't." Deborah said, "Very well, I will go, but you will have no honor, for God will destroy Sisera by the hand of a woman." When Sisera heard that Barak's army was at Mount Tabor, he gathered all his men and his 900 chariots and went out to the river Kishon to fight him. Then Deborah said, "Up, for this is the day God has given Sisera to you." So Barak charged down the mountain with his 10,000 men. God gave them the victory over the larger army, completely destroying it, except for Sisera, who jumped out of his chariot and ran away. Sisera came to the tent of Jael, the wife of Heber, the Kenite. Sisera's king was at peace with the Kenites, so when Jael invited him into her tent to hide, Sisera went in. Jael covered him with a rug. He was tired and thirsty, so she gave him some milk to drink. When Sisera slept, Jael killed him with a tent peg. Later, she called to Barak as he went by, "Come, see your enemy." Whenever God's people trusted in him and obeyed his word, God destroyed their enemies. God needed to destroy these idol worshippers because of their evil acts. They even killed their own children as sacrifices. Under Deborah, the land had peace for 40 years.
Gideon judges Israel. Judges 6 through 8. Once again, the children of Israel did evil. God sent them into the hands of the Midianites for 7 years. The Israelites had to live in caves in the mountains. The Midianites destroyed the Israelites' crops and killed their oxen, sheep, and donkeys. The Israelites cried to God for help once more. God sent them a prophet, saying, I brought you out of Egypt and drove the people out of this land for you. I said, I am your God. Do not worship the idols of this land, but you have not listened to me. In Ophrah, Gideon was beating out wheat in the grape press to hide it from the Midianites. An angel came and said, God is with you, you brave and mighty warrior. Gideon answered, Oh, my Lord, if God is with us, why have these troubles come? Where are all the wonderful works he did for our fathers? God has thrown us aside and given us into the hands of Midian. The angel said, Go now, mighty warrior, and save Israel. Have I not given the country of Midian into your hands? Gideon said, How can I save Israel? My family is the poorest in Manasseh, and I am the youngest in the family. God said through the angel, I will be with you. You will strike down Midian. Gideon wasn't sure about this, so he asked for a sign. He prepared goat meat, unleavened bread, and broth, and brought them to the angel. The angel said, Put the meat and bread on a rock, and pour the broth over it. Then the angel touched the food with his staff, and fire came out of the rock and burned up the meat and bread. Then the angel vanished from his sight. Gideon was afraid. God told him, Peace to you. Fear not, you shall not die. So Gideon built an altar there, called Jehovah Shalom, or God is peace. The same night God told Gideon, Take your father's ox and pull down your father's altar to Baal. Cut down the Asherah, a female idol, next to it. Then build me an altar on top of the heap and offer up a second ox, using the wood from the Asherah for the fire. Gideon took 10 of his servant men and did as God said. He did it at night because he was afraid of his father's household and the men of his city. The next morning, the men saw the destroyed idols and demanded, Who did this? When they found out it was Gideon, they told his father, Send him out so we can kill him. His father, Joash, said, Let Baal do his own fighting. So they called Gideon Jerub-Baal, which means let Baal fight. The Midianites and the Amalekites camped in the valley of Jezreel. God's Spirit came on Gideon. He blew a trumpet and gathered an army of fighting men. Gideon asked God, If you are really going to save Israel through me, please show me a sign. Tonight I will put a fleece of wool on the ground. In the morning, if the ground is dry and there is dew on the fleece only, then I will know you are with me. The next morning, the ground was dry, but Gideon wrung a bowl full of water out of the fleece. Still unsure, Gideon asked for a second sign. This time he asked that the ground be covered with dew and the fleece be dry. God did this for Gideon, just as he had asked, to build his confidence. Gideon camped his army just south of the Midian camp. The Midianites were like locusts, innumerable. God said, Gideon, you have too many soldiers. I do not want Israel to say that they won the battle through the strength of their army. Let anyone who is afraid leave. So 22,000 men left, leaving only 10,000 soldiers. God said, You still have too many soldiers. Take them to some water and watch them drink. If they kneel and put their faces to the water, send them home. If they carry the water to their mouths with their hands and lap like a dog, have them stay. All but 300 men went home. These few took over the tents and trumpets of the other men. God said to Gideon, If you are still afraid to attack, go down to the Midianite camp with your servant Purah and listen. So Gideon and his servant went into the Midianite camp at night. They overheard one soldier telling another, I had a dream, and a loaf of barley bread tumbled into our camp, hit the tent, and turned it upside down, so it fell flat. His friend said, "This is the sword of Gideon, a man of Israel. God has delivered all Midian into his hand." Gideon immediately bowed in worship to God, then returned to his army of 300. He said to them, "Arise, for the Lord has given all the army of Midian into your hands." He divided them into 3 groups of 100 men each. Every man held a trumpet and an empty pitcher. In each pitcher they put a torch, hiding the light. Gideon and his army surrounded the Midian camp. When Gideon gave the signal, all 300 smashed their pitchers and held their torches high. They blew their trumpets and stood in place, shouting, "The sword of the Lord and of Gideon!" The Midianites woke up, thought they were being attacked by a huge army, and started killing each other. They fled, still fighting each other, and were cut off by the soldiers of Ephraim, whom Gideon had called upon to stop the Midianites at the river crossings. The Israelites wanted to make Gideon a king after his great victories, but he said, "I will not rule over you, neither shall my son. God will rule over you." The land had rest for 40 years with Gideon, but as soon as Gideon died, Israel made the idol Baal-berith their god. They did not remember God, who had saved them, nor did they show kindness to the house of Gideon, forgetting all the good that he had done for Israel.
Abimelech, Tola, Jair. Judges 9-10. Gideon had many wives. His 70 sons judged Israel after Gideon died. Another son, Abimelech, born to a woman from Shechem, wanted to rule Israel. Abimelech asked the men of Shechem, "Which is better, to be ruled by 70 or by 1? They gave Abimelech money, and he hired evil men to help kill all of his brothers. Only one, Jotham, escaped. The men of Shechem made Abimelech king over them. When Jotham heard this, he stood on a high mountain and called down to the men of Shechem. One day, the trees went out to set up a king over them. They asked the olive tree, but the tree said, "I'm too busy making olives." They asked the fig tree, and it said, "I need to make figs." They asked the vine, and it said, "I won't stop making grapes." So they asked the bramble, a thorn bush, if it would be king. The bramble said, "I will, but fire will come out of me and burn up the forest, and the fire from the forest will burn me up." By this, Jotham meant that Abimelech would destroy Shechem, and as he did so, the men of Shechem would destroy Abimelech. Then Jotham ran away to a safe place. Abimelech ruled over Israel for 3 years until the men of Shechem grew angry at him. They tried to ambush him, but Abimelech killed the people of the city, destroying it. The remaining people fled to a tower. Abimelech came to the tower, killed the people there, then went to another city. These people also fled to a tower. But when Abimelech came near, one of the women dropped a millstone on him, crushing his head. Next, Tola, a good judge, judged Israel for 23 years, and after him, Jair for 22 years. Jair had 30 sons who rode on 30 donkeys and had 30 cities in the land of Gilead.
Jephthah, Ibzan, Elon, Abdon. Judges 10-12. Again, the Israelites did evil in the sight of God, forsaking him and worshipping idols. They worshipped Baal, Ashereth, the gods of Syria and Sidon, the gods of Moab, the gods of Ammon, and the gods of the Philistines. So God sent the Philistines and the people of Ammon to discipline his people. For 18 years they were oppressed. Again they cried out to God, saying, "We have sinned against you. Please help us." God said, "Didn't I bring you out of Egypt and deliver you from the hands of your various oppressors? Yet you have forsaken me again. I will save you no more. Go and cry unto the gods you worship. Let them save you." The children of Israel cried, "We have sinned. Do to us what seems good to you. Only please deliver us." And they put away their foreign idols and served God again. God felt sorry for them. He raised up Jephthah, a mighty warrior, of the tribe of Gilead. Jephthah led his soldiers to battle against Ammon. He vowed, "God, if you will give us victory over the children of Ammon, I will sacrifice the first thing that comes out of my door to meet me." God gave him the victory, and the first thing to come out to greet him was his only child, a daughter. This made Jephthah very sad. By giving his daughter to God, she could never get married. Jephthah would never have grandchildren. This was his sacrifice, that she served God and never got married. The men of the tribe of Ephraim got mad because they weren't allowed to fight in the battle against Ammon. They threatened to burn Jephthah's house down. Jephthah called an army from Gilead together and fought Ephraim. The men of Gilead captured the Jordan River crossing and put guards on it. When a fugitive of Ephraim wanted to cross the Jordan, the Gilead guards would say, "Say Shibboleth." The Ephraim man would say, "Sibboleth," for he could not pronounce it correctly. Then the guards would kill him. Jephthah led Israel for 6 years. When he died, Ibzan judged Israel for 7 years. He had 30 sons and 30 daughters. Next, Elon judged for 10 years. After him, Abdon judged for 8 years. He had 40 sons and 30 grandsons who rode on 70 donkeys.
Samson. Judges 13 through 16. The sons of Israel again did evil, and God let the Philistines make slaves of them for 40 years. An Israelite named Manoah lived during that time. He and his wife could not have children. An angel appeared to the wife and told her she would have a son. He then explained exactly how God wanted them to raise him. His hair was never to be cut, and he would be blessed with great strength from God. They called the child Samson. When Samson was older, he went to Timnah, a city of the Philistines. There he saw a woman he wished to marry. He took his parents to Timnah, and on the way he killed a lion with his bare hands. When he came back to visit the woman again, he stopped to look at the dead lion. Bees had built a nest in it with honey. Samson took a handful of honey and went on his way. At Samson's wedding feast, 30 young Philistine men were there. He asked the Philistines a riddle. Out of the eater came forth food, and out of the strong came forth sweetness. He bet them 30 sets of clothes that they could not guess his riddle. To win the bet, the Philistines threatened Samson's wife. She cried and wept 7 days until Samson told her the answer. She quickly told the men, who said to Samson, "What is sweeter than honey or stronger than a lion?" Angry, Samson killed 30 other Philistines and took their clothes to pay off the bet. When Samson went down to visit his wife again, her father said, "I thought you hated her, so I married her to a Philistine. Marry her younger sister. She is even prettier." Samson said, "This time I shall be without blame when I harm the Philistines." He caught 300 foxes and tied them tail to tail with a torch in between. He lit the torches, then turned the foxes loose into the fields of the Philistines, burning up their grain, vineyards, and groves. The Philistines said, "Who did this?" And they said, "Samson, the son-in-law of the Timnite." So they killed the Timnite and his daughter. This really made Samson mad, and he began killing many Philistines. He killed so many that they sent out armies against him. They found out he was in Judah, so he went after him. The army camped in Lehi in Judah, and the men of Judah asked them, "Why are you here?" "To capture Samson," they said. Therefore, 3,000 men of Judah went to Samson and said, "We are ruled by the Philistines. They want you, so we have come to take you to them." Samson said, "Do not kill me." They said, "We won't, but we must tie your hands." So they bound him with 2 new ropes and took him to the Philistine army. When Samson got to Lehi, God's Spirit gave him power, so Samson snapped the ropes. He found a fresh jawbone of a donkey and used it as a weapon to kill 1,000 Philistines. When he was finished, he was very thirsty and asked God for help. God split the hollow place in Lehi so that water came out, and Samson drank, and his strength returned. Samson went to Gaza to spend the night. The Philistines learned that he was in the city and plotted to kill him. At midnight, Samson rose up, took the doors of the city gates on his shoulders, along with the posts and the bar, and carried them to the top of the mountain. After this, he loved a Philistine woman named Delilah. The rulers of the Philistines came to her and said, "Find out how Samson gets his strength, so we can capture him. We'll each give you 1,100 pieces of silver." So Delilah said to Samson, "Tell me, please, what makes you so strong? Is there anything that can hold you?" Samson said, "If they bind me with 7 green cords that have not been dried, then I shall become weak like other men." So Delilah hid some men in her house. She bound the sleeping Samson, then cried, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." Samson woke up and broke the cords. Again Delilah said, "Is there anything that can hold you?" Samson said, "If they use new ropes that have never been used." Another time he said, "If you weave the 7 locks of my hair, I shall become weak." Each time she tried it out, Samson was as strong as before. Delilah nagged Samson daily, annoying him to death. "If you loved me, you would tell me. Why do you lie to me? You've deceived me 3 times. Samson finally could take it no longer, so he told her the truth. "I have been a Nazirite all my life. If my hair is shaved, then I shall become weak like other men." Delilah was certain she had the right answer and called the Philistine rulers to come, ready to capture Samson. They brought her money with them. That night, as Samson slept, she had a man cut off Samson's 7 locks of hair. She cried, "The Philistines are here, Samson!" He woke, ready to defend himself, but could not. God had left him because his promise to God was broken. Delilah got her money, and the Philistines poked out Samson's eyes. They took him to Gaza and made him grind grain in the prison house. However, his hair began to grow again. One day the Philistines gathered together to honor Dagon, their god, and to celebrate. They brought Samson into the temple to make fun of him. A boy was leading Samson around. Samson told him, "Let me feel the pillars of the temple, that I may rest." The boy put Samson's hands on the 2 middle pillars. Now the temple was filled with men and women, and around 3,000 more were on the roof. Samson prayed to God for strength. Then he leaned on the pillars, pushing them apart, saying, "Let me die with the Philistines." Samson pushed with all his might, and the temple collapsed, so that he killed more Philistines in his death than in his life. He judged Israel 20 years.
Ruth. The period of Judges covered 300 years. Sometime during this period, the story of Ruth takes place. The book shows God's providential care for a person at the lowest end of Jewish society, a woman, a foreigner, a widow and poor, yet God blessed her because she was faithful to him. A famine came to Bethlehem, Judah. A man named Elimelech and his wife Naomi took their 2 sons and went to live in Moab. They stayed there for some time, and Elimelech died. Naomi's 2 sons married Moabite women, Ruth and Orpah, and lived there about 10 years. Then both young men died, leaving the 3 women all alone. Naomi heard there was food again in Judah, so she decided to return to Bethlehem. Orpah and Ruth went with her, but she told them each to go back to their mother's house and said, "God grant that you may find rest, security in the house of a new husband." Orpah returned to her home, but Ruth would not leave Naomi. Ruth said, "Wherever you go, I will go, and wherever you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die. only death will part us." When Naomi saw that Ruth was determined to go with her, Naomi gave in and let her. They arrived in Bethlehem, and the people came out saying, "Is this Naomi?" "Yes, but call me Mara," she said. Mara means bitter, for Naomi had left with a husband and 2 sons and returned with only Ruth. At this time the barley harvest was just beginning. Ruth went into the fields to glean barley missed by the harvesters. Gleaning was hard work. The law of Moses said this grain was for the poor. The harvester was not to go back for what he missed. This was one of God's ways to care for the poor. When Ruth went to the fields to glean, she turned into the part of a field owned by Boaz, who was a wealthy man and a relative of Naomi's husband. Ruth did not know that God was directing her steps. Boaz came out from Bethlehem to check on the harvest. He spotted Ruth there among his workers. "Who is she?" he asked his foreman. "It's the Moabite woman who returned with Naomi. She asked permission to glean and has been here since morning." Then Boaz said to Ruth, "Do not go into any other fields but mine. Follow my maidens, and when you are thirsty, you may drink from our water supply." Hearing this, Ruth bowed to the ground. "Why have I found favor in your sight, since I am a foreigner?" Boaz said, "I have heard all you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, and how you left your parents and your land to come to a people you did not know. May God reward you fully, under whose wings you have taken shelter." Ruth said, "Let me find favor in your sight, sir, for you have comforted me and spoken kindly to me." At lunchtime, Boaz said to her, "Come and eat with us." Afterwards, when she left to glean again, Boaz told his young men to let her glean among the sheaves and to even pull out some of the grain from the bundles for her, making her work easier. At evening, when Ruth beat out the grain, she had about a bushel, 9 gallons of barley. Naomi was amazed when she saw all the grain that Ruth brought home and asked, "Where did you glean today?" "The owner's name is Boaz." "Blessed be God, who has shown his kindness to the living and the dead. Boaz is a close relative. Do as he said, and glean after his maidens." So Ruth gleaned through the barley harvest and the wheat harvest. At the end of harvesting, Naomi told Ruth to go to the threshing floor where Boaz would be spending the night guarding his grain. There she was to ask him if he would do his part as a relative, which meant buying Elimelech's fields to keep the inheritance in the family. It also meant marrying Ruth and raising up a child to inherit the property. This would give Ruth the security of a family. Boaz was startled when he first saw her, but quickly agreed. "However," he said, "there is a relative nearer than I, who has more of a right to the inheritance than I do. I must ask him first." He gave Ruth 6 measures of barley to take back to Naomi, saying, "Do not return without anything for your mother-in-law." Naomi comforted Ruth, saying, "Patience, my daughter, for Boaz will not rest until he's taken care of this today." Business in those days was done at the gate of the city, so Boaz sat down there. When the other relative walked by, Boaz called him over along with 10 elders of the city. He said, "Sit down with me. Naomi is selling the land that belongs to Elimelech. A close relative must redeem it. Will you do so?" The man said, "Yes. At the same time, you must marry Ruth, the Moabitess, and raise up a child for this inheritance." The relative said, "I cannot redeem it, or I will mess up my own inheritance. You can have my right of redemption instead." He handed Boaz his sandal to confirm his word, as was the custom in those times. All of the people at the gate were witnesses. Boaz and Ruth were married, and God blessed them with a baby boy named Obed. The women of the city said to Naomi, Blessed be God, who has not left you without a relative, and let his name be famous in Israel. Your daughter-in-law, who loves you and is better to you than 7 sons, has given birth to Obed. He shall help you in your old age. Obed became the father of Jesse and the grandfather of David, the 2nd king of Israel.
Samuel and Eli, 1 Samuel 1-7. There was a man from Ramah of the hill country of Ephraim, whose name was Elkanah. He had 2 wives. One wife, Hannah, had no children, but the other wife had children and made Hannah's life miserable. As the years went by, whenever she went to the temple of God, Hannah would weep and not eat. One day, when she was very sad, she prayed to God and said, "O Lord, if you will give me a son, then I will give him to you." As she silently moved her lips in prayer, the high priest, Eli, saw her and thought she was drunk. "How long will you be drunk?" he asked her. "Throw away your wine." Hannah said, "I have not drunk wine. I pour out my soul to God with bitterness of heart and a sorrowful spirit. I am not a wicked woman." Eli said, "Then go in peace, and may God give you what you ask." So she left God's house at Shiloh and returned home. Soon Hannah had a son, whom she named Samuel. She did not forget her promise to God, and when the child was old enough to be without her, she took him to Shiloh. She said to Eli, "I am the woman who prayed for a child, and see, God has heard my prayer. Now I give him to God to serve as long as he lives." She left Samuel there, and Samuel served God before Eli. Hannah and her husband, Elkanah, came once a year to sacrifice. Each year, Hannah made a new robe for Samuel and brought it to him. God blessed Hannah so that she had 3 more sons and 2 daughters. Samuel grew older, serving God, obeying Eli, and growing in favor with God and man. He worshipped God while Eli's sons, Hophni and Phinehas, did not honor God nor serve him. They defiled God's laws and sacrifices. Eli knew the evil they were doing, robbing from the offerings given to God by all the people. But Eli did nothing to stop them because they were making him rich. This continued to anger God and the people. One day God sent a prophet to Eli and told him that because he had not stopped his sons, both of them would die on the same day. God did not talk to many people in those days, and visions were few. One night, as Samuel slept in the temple where the ark of God was, he heard a voice. It said, "Samuel." He said, "Here I am," and ran to Eli to see what he wanted. But Eli said, "I didn't call. Go back to bed." Samuel lay down. Again the voice said, "Samuel." So Samuel ran to Eli. "Here I am. You called?" "I did not call. Go back to bed." Yet again the voice said, "Samuel." This time when Samuel came, Eli realized God had called the boy. So he said, "Go lie down, and if God calls again, say, 'Speak, God, for your servant hears.'" So Samuel went and lay down on his bed. Then God said, "Samuel, Samuel." "Speak, for your servant hears." God said to him, "Behold, I will do a thing in Israel to make everyone's ears tingle. Eli's sons will die on the same day because Eli did not stop them." Samuel lay until morning and opened the doors of God's house. He was afraid to tell Eli the vision, but Eli said, "Tell me." So Samuel told him. Eli said, "It is God's will. Let him do good." As Samuel grew older, God spoke to him again, so all Israel knew Samuel was a prophet of God. The Philistines and the Israelites met in battle, and 4,000 Israelites were killed. When they returned to camp, the elders asked, "Why did God let us lose?" Bring the Ark of the Covenant so it may lead us into battle. Then we'll win." All Israel shouted when the ark arrived, making the Philistines afraid. They said, "God is in the camp. Woe is us! This is the God who brought them out of Egypt. Be strong and fight, or we will all become servants of the Israelites." There was a great battle, and 30,000 Israelites died. The ark of God was captured, and just as God had told Samuel, Hophni and Phinehas were killed on the same day. A man ran to Shiloh to tell Eli, who was worried about the ark being gone. He was 98 years old, a heavy man, and could not see. Eli asked for a report of the battle. The man said, "We lost the battle. Our soldiers were slaughtered. Your 2 sons were killed, and the ark has been captured." When Eli heard that the ark had been taken, he fell backward off his seat by the side of the gate, broke his neck, and died. Eli had judged Israel 40 years. The Philistines took the Ark of the Covenant to Ashdod, where they put it into the house of their idol, Dagon. But the next morning, behold, Dagon had fallen on his face to the ground before the ark. So they set the idol upright once more. The next morning, the idol was again on the ground in front of the ark. This time, its head and hands were cut off. God punished the people of Ashdod with tumors, so they cried out in despair and asked that the ark be moved. It was taken to Gath, where tumors again attacked the people. They sent the ark next to Ekron, and the tumors attacked those people too. The people said, "They have brought the ark of God around to kill us and our people. Send it back where it belongs." After suffering for 7 months, the Philistines sent the ark back, along with gifts of gold, molded into the forms of tumors and mice, for the mice had destroyed their fields. They put the ark on a cart, drawn by 2 milk cows. They said, "If the cows go toward the closest Israelite city, Beth-Shemesh, then we will know God has been doing these things against us. If not, we will know they just happened." The cows went straight to Beth-Shemesh, turning neither to the right or left, and the rulers of the Philistines, seeing this, returned home. The God of the Israelites had brought all those bad things upon them. The Israelites were out reaping their wheat when the cattle came to a stop beside a large stone in the field of Joshua. They split the wood of the cart to get firewood and offered the cows as a burnt offering to God. Next, they took the ark to the house of Abinadab on the hill and consecrated his son, Eleazar, to take care of it. It stayed there 20 years. Samuel told the Israelites, "If you remove your foreign idols and serve God, God will deliver you from the Philistines." They got rid of all their idols and gathered at Mizpah to sacrifice to God. The Philistines heard about it and tried to attack them. But God made it thunder so loudly that it confused and frightened the Philistines. The Israelites won easily. The Philistines left Israel alone during the days of Samuel. Saul becomes king. 1 Samuel 8-13. When Samuel got old, he set up his sons as judges, but his sons were wicked men, just like Eli's sons. The people said, "Your sons are not righteous and good like you. Appoint a king to rule over us." Samuel prayed to God, asking what to do. God said, "Give them a king. They have not rejected you, but they have rejected me from being their king." Samuel told the people, "If you have a king, he will force you to pay taxes. He will take your sons for his warriors and servants. He will take your daughters for cooks and bakers. He will take the best of your fields and give them to his servants." In spite of this warning, the people said, "No, we want a king. We want to be like other nations, with a king we can see." Saul, the tall, handsome son of Kish of the tribe of Benjamin, was hunting for some lost donkeys. He and his servant stopped to ask Samuel if he had seen them. Before they said anything, Samuel said, "Come, eat with me today. In the morning you may leave. Your donkeys, which were missing for 3 days, have been found." God had told Samuel to do this. So Saul and his servant stayed. Samuel set Saul at the head of the table and gave him the best food. The next morning Samuel sent the servant on ahead. Then he anointed Saul king over Israel. He told Saul to come to Mizpah. Samuel called all the tribes of Israel together at Mizpah. He told them God had chosen their king. They cast lots, and the tribe of Benjamin was chosen. Then they cast again, and Saul's family was chosen. Then they cast the lots a final time, and Saul was chosen. But Saul was not to be found. Then God said, "He is hiding by the baggage." So they brought Saul out. He was a head taller than all the other men and more handsome. The people shouted, "Long live the king!" Then they all went home, including Saul. Some people thought Saul wasn't much of a king, but he gathered an army and, with God's help, destroyed the Ammonite army that was attacking the people of Jabesh. This great victory made Saul a hero, and all the people accepted him as their king. Samuel told the people, "Here is the king you asked for. If you honor God and serve God with all your heart, then God will bless both you and your king. But if you rebel against God, then his hand will be against you." Saul chose an army. He kept 2,000 men with him and sent 1,000 with his son Jonathan. The Philistines came with 30,000 chariots, 6,000 horsemen, and a huge army. The Israelites saw them and ran away and hid in caves, cliffs, cellars, and thickets. Saul was waiting for Samuel to come and offer a burnt offering to God. Samuel didn't come, and Saul's frightened soldiers were starting to leave. So Saul disobeyed God. He built an altar and offered a burnt offering without any right to do so. As soon as he finished, Samuel arrived. Samuel said, "What have you done? You have broken God's commandment." Saul said, "You didn't come when you were supposed to. The soldiers were leaving, so I forced myself to offer this sacrifice." Samuel said, "You have done a foolish thing. God would have blessed you and made your kingdom continue on, but now he will give it to another." Jonathan's faith, 1 Samuel 13-14. The Philistines camped by the mountain pass of Michmash. Between the passes there were 2 sharp crags. The Philistines knew how to make iron, but the Israelites didn't. So the Philistines would not let the Israelites have a blacksmith who could work iron, for they did not want the Israelites to make swords and spears out of their farm tools. On the day of the battle, only Saul and his son Jonathan had swords. Jonathan said to his armor-bearer, "Let us cross over to the Philistine camp. Perhaps God will work for us. For it doesn't matter to God if we are a big army or just 2 people." But Jonathan did not tell his father Saul what he was doing. Jonathan said, "We will let the Philistines see us. If they say, 'Wait until we come to you,' then we won't go to fight them. But if they say, 'Come up to us,' then we will climb up, for God will be with us. This will be our sign." So Jonathan and his armor-bearer stood where the Philistines could see them. The Philistines yelled, "Come up to us, and we will show you something." Jonathan said, "Follow me. God has given them into the hands of Israel." So Jonathan climbed up, and he and his armor-bearer killed 20 men. Then there was an earthquake in the enemy's camp. As Saul's watchmen looked on, the Philistine raiders fled, fighting each other. Saul's army rallied, even those who had been hiding, and chased after the Philistines. There was a great battle. Now the men of Israel were having a hard time during the battle, because Saul had put everyone under an oath, saying, "Cursed be the man who eats food today, before we have conquered our enemy." But Jonathan had not heard his father. He ran through the forest, and when he saw honey on the ground, he dipped his staff in a honeycomb and ate, and was refreshed. Then one of the men told him about his father's order. Jonathan said, "My father has caused us harm. See how much stronger I am with just a little honey. If our men had been allowed to eat, they could have had a major victory instead of a small one." At the end of the day, sheep and oxen and calves were slain, and the hungry people did not bleed them properly, but ate them with the blood. This was a sin, for blood is not to be eaten. Then Saul built an altar to God and asked God, "Shall I chase the Philistines more? Will you give them to us?" But God did not answer them on that day, so they cast lots to see who was to blame, and the lot fell on Jonathan. Saul decided that Jonathan must die as punishment for eating. The people said, "Must Jonathan die after God used him to bring this great victory to Israel? Far from it. He has worked with God this day." So the people rescued Jonathan, and he did not die. Saul disobeys God. 1 Samuel 15. As king, Saul led the army against Moab, Ammon, Edom, Zobah, and the Philistines. Wherever he led, the Israelites punished the wicked nations. Samuel said to Saul, "God wants you to destroy the evil country of Amalek as punishment for the way they came against Israel when the people left Egypt. Completely destroy all the people and animals. Do not spare anyone." So Saul took 200,000 foot soldiers and 10,000 men of Judah and went against Amalek. He destroyed all that were there, except he spared the life of King Agag, and kept the best of the sheep, the oxen, the fatlings, the lambs, and all that Saul thought was good. He only destroyed the things he didn't think were worth keeping. God called Samuel, saying, "I regret I made Saul king, for he does not obey me." Samuel wept before God all night, then rose and went to meet Saul. Saul said, "Blessed are you of God. I have done the command of the Lord." "Then why do I hear sheep bleating and oxen lowing?" asked Samuel. Saul said, "The people kept the best so they could sacrifice them, but we destroyed the rest." Samuel said, "Let me tell you what God said. You were little in your own eyes, yet God made you king over this land. God sent you to destroy all the Amalekites, yet you did evil in God's sight and kept the good things you found." Saul said, "I did obey God. I utterly destroyed Amalek and brought back Agag the king. The people took some of the animals to sacrifice to God at Gilgal. This would have given them sacrifices that cost them nothing." Samuel said, "What would God rather have? Burnt offerings and sacrifices, or obedience? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice. Rebellion is like idolatry. You have rejected God's word, so he has rejected you from being king." Saul said, "Please forgive my sin and return and worship with me." Samuel replied, "No, you have rejected God, and he has rejected you." As Samuel turned to go, Saul grabbed his robe and it tore. Samuel said, "God has torn the kingdom from you today and given it to one who is better than you. God will not lie or change his mind, for he is not a man that he should change his mind." Then Samuel sent for King Agag. The king came cheerfully, thinking he had nothing to fear. But Samuel killed him, for Agag was a wicked murderer of men. Samuel went to his home at Ramah and did not see Saul again. Samuel mourned for Saul, but God regretted that he had made Saul king over Israel.
God chooses David. 1 Samuel 16. God asked Samuel, "How long will you mourn for Saul? Fill your horn with oil and go to the house of Jesse. I have chosen a new king among his sons." Samuel said, "How can I go? If Saul hears of it, he'll kill me." God said, "Take a heifer with you and say you are going to sacrifice and invite Jesse and his sons. I will then show you whom I have chosen." So Samuel went to Bethlehem, where Jesse lived. He looked at Eliab, the oldest son of Jesse, and thought, "This must be God's choice." But God said to him, "Do not look at his face or his height, because I have rejected him. For man looks at the outside, but God looks at the heart." In the Bible, heart often means the thoughts and intentions of a person's mind. Samuel looked at 7 of Jesse's sons, and each time God told him that the son was not the one he had chosen. So Samuel said to Jesse, "Do you have any more sons?" "There's just one left. He's keeping the sheep." "Call him here, for we will not sit down until he comes." When David was brought in, he was ruddy, with nice eyes, and handsome. God said to Samuel, "Arise and anoint him, for he is the one." Then Samuel anointed David king in the midst of his brothers, and the Spirit of God came upon David from that day forward. At that time, the Spirit of God left Saul, and an evil spirit terrorized him. When his servants realized this, they sent for David, because they knew he was skilled at playing the harp. David became Saul's armor-bearer, and whenever Saul's spirit became troubled, David would play, and Saul would be comforted. David and Goliath. 1 Samuel 17. Now the Philistines gathered their army to fight Israel. Their champion, Goliath of Gath, was a giant of a man who stood 9.5 feet tall. He had a bronze helmet on his head and bronze armor on his body. Everything about him was huge and heavy. Every day, for 40 days, he challenged the Israelites to send a champion out to fight him. "If he can kill me, we will be your servants. But if I kill him, you will serve us." When Saul and all Israel heard these words, they were afraid. Now Jesse's 3 older sons were in Saul's army, but the youngest, David, went back and forth from Saul to tend his father's sheep at Bethlehem. One day, Jesse told David to take food to his brothers and find out how they were doing. So David rose early in the morning, left the flock with a keeper, and went to the valley of Elah. He came to the camp as Goliath came out and yelled his challenge, "I defy the army of Israel! Give me a man, that we may fight together!" Hearing him, the Israelites fled. David said, "Who is this Philistine, that he defies the armies of the living God?" The people told him, adding, "Whoever kills Goliath will be given great riches by King Saul. The king will also give him his daughter to marry." David's brother, Eliab, heard David's question and said, "What are you doing here? Shouldn't you be with the sheep?" David said, "What have I done now? I just asked a question." He turned away from Eliab and asked another man about Goliath, and got the same reply. Hearing about David's questions, Saul sent for him. David said, "No man needs to be afraid of Goliath. I'll go fight this Philistine." Saul said, "You can't go. You are just a youth, and this man has been a warrior since his youth." David said, I tended my father's sheep. When a lion or a bear came out and took a lamb from the flock, I attacked it and killed it and rescued the lamb. I have killed both lion and bear, and this Philistine will be like one of them, since he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord has delivered me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear. He will deliver me from Goliath." Saul said to David, "Go, and may God go with you." Saul gave David his own armor, but it was too large. David took it off, saying, "I can't wear this." David took his staff and slingshot and chose 5 smooth stones from the brook, put them in his shepherd's pouch, and approached the Philistine. Goliath said, "Am I a dog that you come at me with sticks? Come to me and I'll feed you to the birds." David said, "You come to me with a sword, a spear, and a javelin, but I come to you in the name of God, whom you have defied. This day God will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you down and remove your head from you, and I will give the dead bodies of your Philistine army to the birds of the sky and the beasts of the field, so that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel, and that all standing around here may know that God does not deliver by sword or spear. The battle belongs to the Lord. He will give you into our hands." Goliath stepped forward, and David ran to meet him. David put his hand in his bag and took one of the stones and slung it. The stone struck the Philistine right in the forehead, and he fell on his face to the ground. David had no sword, so he ran up to Goliath and took his sword out of his sheath and cut off Goliath's head. When the Philistines saw their champion was dead, they ran away. The men of Israel chased them, killing them as they fled. David and Jonathan, 1 Samuel 18 through 22. Saul kept David as a warrior after Goliath's death. Saul's son Jonathan immediately liked David, and they became as close as brothers. The women danced and sang, "Saul has slain 1,000 men, and David 10,000. This made Saul very, very jealous, and he said, "What? Will he want the kingdom next?" So he watched David with suspicion from then on. As David played the harp for Saul the next day, Saul threw his spear at David, trying to kill him. Later, he tried again, but David managed to escape both times. Saul grew afraid of David, for he could see God was with him. Saul gave his daughter, Michal, to David as a wife. Saul made David a captain over 1,000 men. All Israel loved David. Even the Philistines held him in awe. But Saul kept trying to put David into situations where he would be killed. One day, Saul told Jonathan and all his servants to kill David. Jonathan said, "Why do you wish to kill David? He has done you no harm, but instead has killed your enemies. Will you sin by killing an innocent man?" Then Saul listened to Jonathan. There was another war with the Philistines, and David destroyed them. Saul was upset and once again tried to kill David with his spear, but David escaped, and the spear stuck into the wall. The next morning, Saul sent men to David's house with orders to kill him. But Saul's daughter, Michal, heard of the plot and told her husband to flee for his life. David fled to Samuel at Ramah and told Samuel all that Saul had done. He and Samuel went to Naioth to live. Saul sent men there to kill David, but God caused the men to prophesy. Saul sent another group of men, and the same thing happened. So Saul himself went to kill David, but God's Spirit made Saul prophesy all day and all night. This allowed David to escape, and he went to Jonathan. David asked him, "What have I done, that your father is trying to kill me?" Jonathan said, "No, he can't be. My father tells me everything, and he hasn't mentioned this." David said, "Your father knows we are friends and hasn't told you. As God lives, I am but a step away from death. Whatever you want, I'll do for you." David said, "Tomorrow is the new moon. I'm supposed to eat with your father, but instead I will hide in the field. If your father misses me, you are to say, 'David asked to be excused to go to Bethlehem.' If your father says good, then we'll know I'm safe. But if he is furious, then we'll know I must flee." So David and Jonathan went out to the field, and Jonathan said, "I promise to let you know my father's feelings. Promise me that you will not kill me or any of my household." And David promised. Jonathan said, "Wait 3 days, then go hide behind this stone. I will shoot 3 arrows like I'm target practicing. I will send a boy to go get the arrows. Depending on what I tell the boy, you will know how my father feels. May God be between us forever." The feast lasted for 3 days. On the 2nd day, Saul said, "Where is David? He wasn't here yesterday either." Jonathan said, "He needed to go to Bethlehem." This angered Saul. "Why are you friends with David? If he lives, he will be the next king. Not you. He must die." Jonathan said, "Why? What has he done?" Saul was so angry, he threw his spear at his own son. So Jonathan knew his father meant to kill David. Jonathan did not eat, but grieved for David. In the morning, Jonathan took a boy to the field. He said, "Run and find the arrows which I shoot." The boy ran, and Jonathan shot the arrows past him, saying, "Is not the arrow beyond you? Run quickly, do not stay." The boy gathered the arrows and brought them to Jonathan. Then Jonathan gave him his weapons and had the boy take them back to the city. When the boy left, David stepped out of hiding, and the 2 friends wept. They agreed that their families should be friends forever, and parted. Saul pursues David. 1 Samuel 21 through 23. To escape Saul, David fled to Nob, where Ahimelech, the priest, came out to meet him. Trembling, Ahimelech said, "Why are you alone?" "The king sent me on a secret mission," David said, telling a lie. "Give me 5 loaves of bread, or whatever you have." The priest said, "I have no ordinary bread, only holy bread. You may have that." Now Doeg the Edomite, a servant of Saul, was there that day. David saw him. David said to Ahimelech, "Is there a spear or sword here? I left in a hurry and didn't bring one with me." Ahimelech said, "Only the sword of Goliath." "I'll take that." At this time, David probably wrote Psalm 34. It tells how God hears the cry of the righteous and helps them out of their troubles. David went to the cave at Adullam. When his brothers and all in his father's house found out where he was, they went to help him. People who were in distress or in debt or just discontented joined David, so that he became a leader of 400 men. The men from the tribe of Gad also joined him. They were mighty, men of valor, trained for war. The least among them was equal to 100 men, and the greatest fought like 1,000 men. A prophet told David to go to Judah. Saul heard about it. Doeg the Edomite told Saul that earlier he had seen Ahimelech, the priest of Nob, help David. Saul sent for the priest, saying, "You helped my enemy." Ahimelech said, "Who among all your servants is as faithful as David? I know nothing of this." Saul said, "You shall die." He told his guards, "Kill the priests of God for helping David. They knew he fled and did not tell me." But the guards would not kill God's priests. So Saul said to Doeg, "You kill them." Then Doeg slew Ahimelech and 84 other priests in Nob. There was only one survivor, Ahimelech's son Abiathar, who escaped to David. David said to Abiathar, "I knew that day when I saw Doeg there that he would tell Saul, 'My lie has caused the death of your father's house. Remain with me where you will be safe.'" David spares Saul's life. 1 Samuel 24. Saul found out that David was living at the stronghold of Engedi. So Saul took an army of 3,000 men and went after him. At Engedi, There was a large cave in the rocks, and David and his men hid there. Saul came into the cave, not knowing anyone was inside it, and sat down in the entrance to rest. David's men said, "Look, God has given your enemy into your hand." So David crept up to Saul and cut off part of his robe. Then David said, "I shouldn't have done that. Saul was anointed king by God." So David stopped his men from harming Saul. David waited until Saul left the cave. Then David called out, "My lord, the king!" When Saul looked back, David bowed to him and said, "Why do you listen to men who say I will harm you? God gave you to me in the cave. I could have killed you, but I will not harm you, for you are God's anointed. Look, here is part of your robe which I cut off, sparing your life. I have not sinned against you, and will not, though you hunt me. May God judge between us and deliver me out of your hand." Then Saul said, "David, is that you? You are more righteous than I am, for no one lets his enemy escape. I know God will give you the kingdom, so please do not kill me or my family." And Saul took his army and went home. David and Abigail, 1 Samuel 25. Samuel died, and all Israel mourned. A very rich man of Maon, named Nabal, was shearing his sheep in Carmel. David heard about it and sent 10 young men to him. The men said to Nabal, "Good health to you. We are from David. While we have been in your area, we have protected your shepherds and sheep, so that nothing is missing. Therefore, please give your servants and David whatsoever you wish as a reward." They were right to ask this. But Nabal said, "Who is David? I'm not going to give him a thing." David's men returned to him and told him what Nabal had said. Enraged, David took his sword, gathered 400 men, and started out. David said, "It was foolish of me to watch over Nabal's men and flock. He has paid me back evil for good, so I will kill him and his men." In the meantime, one of Nabal's men went to Nabal's wife Abigail, saying, "David sent some young men to us to bless our master." And Nabal yelled at them and was very rude. But these men were very good to us while we were in the fields keeping the sheep. They protected us day and night so that our flock was safe. Now what shall we do? For evil will come, and Nabal is such a worthless man, no one can speak to him. Then Abigail hurriedly gathered 200 loaves of bread, 5 butchered sheep, and other food, and put them on donkeys. She sent the food ahead of her and followed on a donkey. When Abigail met David, she dismounted and bowed to the ground, saying, "Please hear me. Take no regard for Nabal. His name means fool, and he is foolish. Instead, blame me, as I did not see the young men you sent. May this gift of food, which I bring to you, be given to your men. You will one day be king over Israel, and you do not want the guilt of innocent blood on your hands." David said, "As God lives, you have kept me from sinning, for I was ready to take vengeance with my own hand." David took what she had brought and returned to his camp, and Abigail went back to Nabal. Nabal held a great feast, like the feast of a king, and became very drunk. Abigail waited until the next morning to tell him what had happened. When he heard it, his heart died within him, and he became like stone. 10 days later, God struck Nabal dead. When David heard that Nabal was dead, he blessed God. David asked Abigail to marry him, and she did. David also took Ahinoam of Jezreel for a wife. David takes Saul's spear. 1 Samuel 26 through 27. David was hiding in the wilderness of Ziph when he heard that Saul was hunting him with 3,000 soldiers. David sent out spies and learned where Saul had camped. David said, "Who will go down with me to where Saul sleeps?" His nephew, Abishai said, "I'll go with you." So David and Abishai crept into camp and found Saul sleeping with his spear stuck in the ground near his head. Abishai said to David, "God has given you your enemy today. I'll kill him with one thrust of the spear." David said, "No, no one can strike down God's anointed and be without sin. Saul will die when it is time for Saul to die. Take Saul's spear and water jug and let's go." God had put Saul's men into a deep sleep, so they did not hear David and Abishai. The next morning, David stood on the mountaintop and shouted at Abner, the commander of Saul's army, "Answer me, Abner! What kind of guard are you over the king? You should die, you and your men, because you let an enemy into your camp. Look, here is Saul's spear and water jug." Saul said, "Is that you, David?" David said, "Yes. What have I done that you continue to hunt me?" Saul said, "I have sinned. I will hurt you no more. I have been a fool." David said, "Here's the king's spear. Let one of your young men come over and take it." David went away, and Saul went home. David said in his heart, "Saul will kill me one of these days. I will go to the land of the Philistines, and maybe I can find peace there." So David took his 600 men and their families to Gath and lived there. When Saul heard that David was out of his country, he stopped hunting for him. David asked the king of Gath if he and his men could have somewhere to live. Knowing that Saul was an enemy to David, the king gave them the city of Ziklag. Later, when the king heard a false report that David had raided in South Judah, he was happy, thinking that now David could never return to his homeland of Judah. But David had actually raided in the land of the Amalekites. The king of Gath decided to raid Judah and fight against Saul. He invited David to go along. David asked God to keep him out of the battle. God answered his prayer by having some of the Philistine commanders become afraid to have David along, especially behind them. They complained to the king, so the king said to David, "Now go back and leave us. Go in peace, that you do not upset all my commanders. Leave early at first light." So David and his men headed back to the land of the Philistines. Saul's last days. 1 Samuel 28 through 31. Looking at the huge Philistine army that had gathered against him, Saul trembled in fear. He sought advice from God, but God did not answer him. Saul found out there was a witch in Endor. So Saul disguised himself and went to see her. God had forbidden the practice of witchcraft, soothsayers, mediums, wizards, and their like. So when Saul sought out the witch, he was deliberately sinning. Saul asked the witch to call up Samuel from the dead. The woman called Samuel, and he came forth, scaring her silly because this had never happened before. Witches cannot really do anything they claim to do. When she saw Samuel, she realized Saul had deceived her. Samuel said to Saul, "Why do you bother me?" Saul said, "The Philistines are warring against me, and God has left me, so I called you to find out what to do." Samuel said, "Why send for me when God has left you? Because you did not obey his voice, he has given your kingdom to David. Tomorrow you and your sons will die, and the Israelites will lose the battle to the Philistines." Saul was terrified and fell to the ground and had no strength. Meanwhile, David and his men returned to their homes in Ziklag. They found the city burned and their wives and families captured by a raiding group of Amalekites. David took 600 of his men and pursued them. He had to leave 200 men behind at the brook Besor because they were too exhausted to cross it. As he chased after the Amalekites, David found a sick Egyptian servant who the Amalekites had left behind without food or water. David gave him water and food, and he regained his strength. The servant led them to the Amalekite camp, where a victory celebration was taking place. David and his men fought and won, and rescued all their wives and children, and everything else that had been stolen from their homes. When they went back, they came to the brook where the 200 waited with the baggage. Some of the wicked and selfish with David said, "Because these did not go with us, we will give them none of the spoils, except for their wives and children." David said, "Not so. We share alike, those who go to battle and those who stay behind with the baggage. Besides, God has given these treasures to us, and God has kept us alive, and God gave us victory over our enemies." As David passed through Judah, he sent spoils of war to all the cities in Judah that had given him aid, and told them, "Behold, a gift for you from the spoils of the enemies of God." The next day, the Philistines fought against Israel. They killed Jonathan and Saul's other sons. Saul could see that the battle was lost, and the archers were coming near. He was already badly wounded by arrows, so he fell upon his sword, killing himself. The Israelites fled from their cities, and the Philistines moved in. Saul and his sons were buried by the men of Jabesh Gilead. Saul was 30 years old when he became king, and he reigned over Israel about 40 years.
David becomes king. 2 Samuel 1-5. An Amalekite came to David's home in Ziklag to tell him about Saul's death. He said, "I found Saul leaning on his spear with the Philistine army closing in. Saul was seriously injured, and he begged me to kill him, so I did. Your enemy is now dead, along with his son. I have brought you the crown from the king's head and the bracelet from his arm." David mourned for Saul and Jonathan. He said, "Kill the Amalekite, because he has killed God's anointed king." Before David took any action, he always asked God if he should do it or not. This is one of the reasons David was so special to God. After Saul's death, God told David and his men to leave Ziklag and go to the cities of Judah. David moved to Hebron. He was of the tribe of Judah, and they made him their king. In the meantime, Abner, Saul's captain, had made Saul's son, Ishbosheth, the new king over Israel. Ishbosheth ruled 2 years. There was a long war between the house of Saul, with Abner as captain, and the house of David, with Joab as captain. David's group grew stronger as Ishbosheth's grew weaker. Ishbosheth made Abner angry, so Abner switched sides, coming over to David. David asked Abner to bring back Michal, David's former wife. This Abner did, taking her away from the husband Saul had made her marry. After Abner met with David, he left to encourage the rest of Israel to make David their king. But David's captain Joab hated Abner because Abner had killed Joab's brother. Joab said to David, "Abner came to deceive you and spy on us." Joab later called Abner aside as if he had a message for him and killed him. David mourned for Abner since Abner was a great warrior. When Ishbosheth heard of Abner's death, he lost courage. Ishbosheth was in his bed when 2 of his army captains came and killed him. They cut off his head and took it to David, thinking they would be rewarded. Instead, David had them killed for murdering an innocent man. The rest of the tribes of Israel now proclaimed David their king. He was 30 years old when he became king, and he reigned for 40 years. He ruled for 7 years and 6 months in Hebron and 33 years in Jerusalem.
The prayer of Jabez. 1 Chronicles 4:9-10. During this time there lived a man named Jabez. He was more honorable than his brothers. Jabez prayed to God, Oh, that you will bless me indeed and enlarge my border. May your hand be with me and keep me from evil, that it be not to my sorrow. And God granted him what he asked for.
David's mighty men. 1 Chronicles 11 through 12. David had men of all tribes join him who were mighty warriors of great courage. Jashobeam and Abishai, the brother of Joab, were among them. They each killed 300 enemy soldiers at one time by themselves. One time, during harvest, 3 of David's mighty men were with him at the cave of Adullam. When David longed for a drink of water from the well outside Bethlehem, these 3 men went to Bethlehem, fought off the Philistine army that was camped there, and brought him back some water. David would not drink it. "Should I drink this, which is of the blood of men who risked their lives for it?" So David poured it out onto the ground as an offering to God. These great warriors did things like this continually. David takes Jerusalem. 2 Samuel 5 through 11. David went to Jerusalem to capture the city. The Jebusites who lived there taunted him, saying, "The blind and lame can hold this fortress against you." David was angry and said, "Whoever is the first to enter the city will become the chief of my armies." Joab led the men into the city and won the position of leader of David's army. They captured Jerusalem, and David made it his headquarters. It became known as the City of David. Then Hiram, king of Tyre, sent cedar wood and carpenters to build David a house. David said, "Let us bring the ark of God to Jerusalem." So they put the ark on a new cart pulled by oxen, with David and the others following along celebrating. As they passed the threshing floor of Nacon, the oxen stumbled. The man driving the oxen, Uzzah, grabbed the ark to keep it on the cart. God killed him instantly, for only priests could touch or carry the ark. David was afraid of God that day, saying, "How will I ever bring the ark to Jerusalem?" He left it at the house of Obed-Edom for 3 months. David prepared a place for the ark. This time he took Levites to carry the ark properly. So the ark was safely brought to Jerusalem. David appointed Levites to care for the ark there. David's friend Jonathan had a son named Mephibosheth. Earlier, when Jonathan died, the child's nurse took the child and ran with him, fearing for his life. The boy fell and both his legs were crippled. When David heard that a son of Jonathan lived, he sent for him and gave him everything that belonged to Saul. David instructed Saul's former servants to care for Mephibosheth, and he had him eat at his table like one of his own sons. David had a nice house and wanted to build one for God, so he shared his idea with the prophet Nathan. He told him to go ahead and do it. But that night God spoke to Nathan and said, "Who am I to live in a house? Have I ever needed a house? Have I ever asked for a house? However, I will reward David. I will make his name great. I, God, will make a house, a family for David. I will raise up a line of kings. From this line, Jesus will come." Later, when David is dead, his son Solomon will build a house, a temple for me. David has killed too many people. There is blood on his hands. But I have found David, the son of Jesse, a man after my own heart, who will do all my will. David's sin. 2 Samuel 11 through 12. One evening, David walked around the roof of his palace and saw a very beautiful woman named Bathsheba, who was taking a bath. He found out she was the wife of Uriah the Hittite, a man of courage and honor, who was out fighting in the war. David sent for Bathsheba. Later she told him she would have his child. David sent a messenger to Joab, who was leading his army. "Send me Uriah the Hittite." Uriah came, and David asked him about the battle. Then David said, "Go home and rest." But Uriah would not go. He said, Should I go home with my wife when my fellow soldiers are at war and camp in the field?" So David sent him back to Joab with a note. The note said, "Put Uriah in the front of the battle, and then draw back from him so he will be killed by the enemy." So Joab put Uriah at the point where the strongest defenders of the city were. When Uriah was killed, Joab sent the news to David. Bathsheba mourned her husband, then married David. They had a son. Their sin made God angry, and he sent the prophet Nathan to David. Nathan said, "A traveler came to a rich man who had many flocks. The rich man refused to eat one of his own lambs, but instead killed the lamb of a poor man. The poor man had only this one lamb, which he treated like a child." David was angry and cried out, "The rich man should be killed, but he should at least give back 4 lambs in return because he had no pity." Nathan said, "That man is you. God says, 'I anointed you king over Israel and kept Saul from killing you. I gave you all Israel and Judah and would have given you more. So why do you hate my word and do evil? You have killed Uriah and taken his wife. I, God, will raise up evil against you in your own house, and the firstborn son of Bathsheba will die." David said, "I have sinned against God." Nathan said, "Because you confessed your sins, you will not die. But your sin has given God's enemies an excuse to speak evil against him. Therefore, you will lose this child." David and Bathsheba's son became very sick. David mourned and would not eat nor be comforted. On the 7th day, the child died. David's servants hesitated to say anything to him, for they said to each other, "How much greater will David mourn now that the child is dead?" David saw them talking among themselves. He asked, "Is the child dead?" And they said, "He is dead." So David arose and washed and worshipped God. Then he went home and ate. His servants said to him, "What are you doing? While the child was alive, you fasted and mourned, but when he died, you got up and ate?" David said, "While he was alive, I fasted and wept, for I thought, 'Maybe God will be gracious to me and let the child live.' But now he is dead. Why should I fast? I shall go to him, but he cannot return to me." David comforted his wife, Bathsheba, and they had another son, Solomon. David promised Bathsheba that Solomon would be the next king. David's troubles. 2 Samuel 14 through 19. Absalom was one of David's favorite sons. He killed another of David's sons, his evil brother Amnon. Then he fled, staying away for 3 years. David mourned for Absalom while he was away, but refused to see him when he returned. After 2 years, Absalom sent for Joab. When Joab would not come, Absalom set Joab's fields on fire. He told Joab, "Get David to see me. Tell him, if there is sin in me, then let me be put to death. But get him to agree to see me." When David met with Absalom, he forgave him. Then Absalom plotted against his father, David. He went to the city gates, and if any man came with a problem for David to hear, Absalom would sympathize with him and promise justice if he were a judge. In this way, Absalom stole the hearts of David's people. At the end of 40 years, Absalom told David he was going to Hebron to sacrifice. Instead, he gathered people about him and had himself proclaimed king. When David found out, he fled Jerusalem, taking his household with him. Zadok, the priest, brought the ark with them, but David sent him back to Jerusalem with it. David said to Zadok, "If I find favor in God's eyes, he will bring me back. If not, then I will not return. I will wait at the river crossing for a message from you." Then David was told, Your adviser, Ahithophel, is on Absalom's side. He will advise him now." So David prayed to God, "Please turn his advice to foolishness." God answered David's prayer through Hushai, a faithful friend of David, who agreed to stay behind and give Absalom bad advice. Absalom moved into David's house in Jerusalem. Hushai arrived there saying, "Long live the king! Long live the king!" Absalom said, "Why didn't you go with David? Is this your idea of friendship?" Hushai said, "Only the man whom God has chosen is my friend. I will serve him." This made Absalom happy. Absalom asked Ahithophel for his advice. Ahithophel said, "David and his men will be tired and weak. Let me take 12,000 men and pursue David tonight. The king will be easy to kill. We shall bring the others back here, and there will be peace in Israel." Then Absalom asked Hushai for his advice. Hushai said, "David and his mighty men are all warriors. They will have left the women and children in a safe place and lie in wait for you to pursue. Wait until you have an army which you can lead yourself. All Israel will back you." God had this advice sound best to Absalom, because God wanted Absalom to be defeated. Hushai sent a message to David, telling him what was happening. 2 loyal men started off to David with the message, but were seen. Absalom quickly sent soldiers after them. The 2 men went to a house which had a well in the courtyard. They climbed down into it, and the women who lived there covered the well with a small pile of grain so no one could see the well. The soldiers came, looked around, then went on. When they failed to find the men, they returned to Jerusalem. The message got to David, and he and his followers had time to cross the Jordan to safety. When Ahithophel saw his advice was not followed, he saddled his donkey, went home, and hanged himself. With his people safe, David divided his men into 3 armies. He told each commander, "Deal gently with my son Absalom." They fought Absalom's men in a forest, and more men died because of the forest than by the sword. Absalom was chased. Riding fast, his donkey went under a tree, and Absalom's head caught in the branches. The donkey ran out from under him, leaving him hanging there. A man told Joab, and Joab asked, "Why didn't you kill him?" The man repeated David's command to protect Absalom. So Joab found Absalom and stabbed him in the heart with 3 short spears, then buried him in a pit in the forest. David's men rejoiced at the defeat of Absalom, but David mourned. "Oh, my son, Absalom! Oh, Absalom, my son, my son!" Joab said, "You are turning our victory into mourning. You are shaming the men who fought for you. You love the one who hated you and hate the ones you should love? If you don't stop crying for Absalom, all your men will leave you." So David stopped crying and went to the city gates where all could see their king alive and well. David numbers his warriors. 2 Samuel 20-24. David and his followers returned to Jerusalem, but the people quarreled. David had to stop a rebellion led by Sheba. He sent Joab after Sheba, who fled to a city. When Joab started to destroy it, a wise woman stopped him and had the city give him Sheba's head. David decided to number his warriors. This was a sin, trusting in the number of warriors rather than in God. Joab said, "Why do you do this?" David insisted, so Joab counted the men. When David received the count, he thought, "I have sinned." He confessed this to God. God was not pleased with what David had done. He sent the prophet Gad to tell David, "Because of your sin, I'll give you 3 choices. 7 years of famine on the land, your foes chasing you for 3 months, or 3 days of disease. David said, "Let me fall into God's hand and not man's," so he let God make the choice. As a result of David's sin, a disease swept the land, killing 70,000 Israelites. God stopped the angel of death before it struck Jerusalem. The angel stopped at the threshing floor of Araunah, the Jebusite. The prophet Gad told David to go to the threshing floor and build an altar there. Araunah saw David coming and went out to meet him. "Why do you come, my king?" "To buy your threshing floor, to build an altar that the disease may be stopped." "Take what you want. Look, I give you the oxen for the offering and the yoke and threshing tools for the wood. May God accept you." David said, "No, I will buy it from you for a good price. I will not offer to God that which costs me nothing." So David bought it for 50 shekels of silver. He paid 15 pounds of gold for the surrounding land. He offered the wheat and oxen to God, and God answered with fire from heaven which consumed the offering. Then the angel put away his sword. David said, "God's house is to be built here on the threshing floor of Araunah." God had said David could not build it, but Solomon could. David named Solomon the next king and charged him with building the temple.
Solomon's reign. 1 Kings 1 through 11, 2 Chronicles 1 through 9. King David was very old, and one of his sons, Adonijah, said, "I will be king." So Adonijah called a group together, including Joab, and proclaimed himself king. He traveled about with chariots and soldiers. He held a feast, but he did not call Nathan the prophet, Zadok the priest, his brother Solomon, or even the mighty warriors that were loyal to King David. And he did not tell his father, David. Nathan, however, knowing what Adonijah was doing, said to David, "You must tell the people who will rule after you, for Adonijah has proclaimed himself king." David said, "Take my son Solomon and Zadok and the mighty men and anoint Solomon king at Gihon. Blow the trumpet and say, 'Long live King Solomon.'" When they did this, all the people rejoiced. The people at Adonijah's feast said, "What is all the shouting about?" The priest's son came to them and said, "King David has made Solomon king over Israel." David sent him on his own donkey to Gihon, and Zadok and Nathan have anointed Solomon king. All the city is rejoicing. This is the noise you are hearing. Then all the guests of Adonijah were afraid and fled from him. Solomon sent this message to Adonijah, "If you show yourself worthy, you may live, but if you behave wickedly, you will die." David was about to die, so he commanded his son Solomon, "Be strong and prove yourself a man. Keep the commandments of God that you may be successful in all you do." David warned Solomon to watch out for Joab, who had murdered both Abner and Amasa. David then died. He had been king over Israel for 40 years. Next, Adonijah tried to trick Solomon out of the throne, so Solomon had him and Joab put to death. Solomon put Benaiah, one of David's mighty men, in charge of the army. Solomon's kingdom was now strong and peaceful. Then Solomon went to Gibeon to sacrifice. There God appeared to him in a dream. God said, "What would you wish for that I might give you?" Solomon said, "You have shown my father your loving kindness. I am but a child in the middle of a great people. Please grant me wisdom to judge between good and evil." God was pleased that Solomon had asked for wisdom and not for riches, long life, or the ability to conquer enemies. God said to Solomon, "Because you asked for wisdom, I will give it to you. There never has, nor never will be anyone as wise as you. And because you did not ask for riches or honor, I will give them to you also. And if you will walk with me and keep my commandments, I will give you a long life." Solomon awoke from the dream, knowing God had spoken to him. One day, while Solomon sat judging his people, 2 women came to him. One woman said, "Oh, my lord, I and this woman share a house. We both had a baby 3 days apart. During the night, her son died, and she switched her dead baby with my live one." The other woman said, "No, her son is dead. The living child is mine." Then King Solomon said, "Bring me a sword." They brought him a sword, and he said, "Cut the living child in 2 and give half to one and half to the other." The child's real mother said, "Oh no, my lord, give her the baby. Do not kill him." The other woman said, "It will not be yours or mine. Cut it in 2. Solomon said, "Give the first woman the living child. Do not kill him, for she is the mother." All Israel heard of the king's judgment and feared the king, for they saw that he had the wisdom of God. Solomon ruled over all the land between the Euphrates River and Egypt. His land had peace and was secure. In the 4th year of his reign, he started to build the temple for God. Hiram, king of Tyre, a good friend of David, sent cedar and cypress trees out of Lebanon for the temple. Solomon spent 7 years building the temple. He started construction 480 years after the Israelites had come out of Egypt. The temple was beautiful, made of cedar and covered with gold. It was shaped like the tabernacle, with a holy place and a most holy place. All the stones and carvings were done elsewhere, so no sound of hammer or axe was heard at the building site. The temple was the most beautiful building in all the land. When the temple was done, they put the ark and the other vessels inside it. Solomon gave a speech and prayer of dedication. Later, God spoke to Solomon a second time, saying, "If you keep my law, then I will establish your throne forever. But if you or your children stop following me, then I will cut off Israel from this land. This temple will become a pile of rubbish. All will say, 'God has forsaken them because they left him.'" Solomon built many other buildings. He had a navy of ships at Tarshish and also one on the Red Sea in the land of Edom. They brought in gold from Ophir, silver, ivory, apes, and peacocks. When the queen of Sheba heard of Solomon's wisdom, she came to find out for herself if it were true. She arrived in Jerusalem with a great train of camels and spices, gold, and precious stones. She asked Solomon all her questions, and he answered her. She decided that his wisdom and wealth were even greater than she had heard. She said, "Blessed is the Lord your God, because the Lord loved Israel. He made you king to do justice and righteousness." Solomon took in huge amounts of gold each year. He had a throne built of ivory and covered it with gold. King Solomon became greater than all the kings of the earth in riches and wisdom. He is thought to be the writer of the book of Ecclesiastes, the Song of Solomon, and most of the Proverbs. Yet, Solomon did have one problem. Solomon loved many foreign women. God had said, "You shall not marry them." Solomon did marry them and built altars for their idols. He had 700 wives and 300 concubines. When Solomon was old, they turned his heart away from God. The kingdom is divided. 1 Kings 12, 2 Chronicles 1 through 9. When Solomon grew old, his wives turned his heart away from God. This angered God, and he determined to give half of Solomon's kingdom to Jeroboam, Solomon's servant. God sent his prophet, Ahijah, to meet Jeroboam as he walked in a field. Ahijah had on a new robe, and he tore it into 12 pieces. He gave 10 pieces to Jeroboam, saying, "You will rule over 10 tribes." Later, Solomon died, and his son Rehoboam became king. The people asked him to lighten the burden that Solomon had placed on them. The older men who had advised Solomon said, "Make it easier for the people." But Rehoboam asked the younger men, "What shall I do?" They were greedy for riches far greater than Solomon's, so they said, "Make things harder on everyone." Rehoboam followed the younger men's bad advice. He answered the people saying, "I will make your burdens even heavier. My father rules you with whips. I will use scorpions." Rebelling, the 10 northern tribes left him and chose Jeroboam as their new king, as Ahijah had foretold. They called their new country Israel. Rehoboam gathered men to fight them, but God told him, "Go home. You shall not fight with your brothers." Jeroboam builds 2 altars, 1 Kings 12 through 15. The children of Israel traveled each year to Jerusalem to observe certain feasts. Jeroboam became afraid that the people would leave him once they traveled to Jerusalem to worship God. So he made 2 calves of gold and put one at Bethel and the other at Dan, saying, "Here are your gods which brought you out of Egypt." In this way, he caused Israel to greatly sin. He even appointed priests who were not Levites. Jeroboam went to his altar to burn incense, and a man of God stood there. The man cursed the altar, saying, "One day Josiah, a son of David, will kill the false priest and burn their bones upon this altar." Jeroboam put out his hand toward the prophet, saying, "Seize him!" His hand became paralyzed, and he begged the prophet to heal it. The prophet healed Jeroboam's hand, but refused his offer to eat with him. God had told the young prophet not to eat or drink, nor return the same way he came, so he left the king. As the young prophet got near Bethel, an old prophet came out to meet him. The old prophet said, "Come home with me and eat. I am a prophet, and the angel spoke to me. He said, 'Bring him back into the city, that he may eat and drink.'" But the old prophet lied to him. The younger prophet went with him, disobeying God's command. After they had eaten, the old prophet said, "You will die for disobeying." As the young prophet returned on his donkey, a lion killed him and stood by the body. The lion did not kill or eat the donkey or tear the young prophet's body. So the old prophet rode out and got the body and buried it in his tomb. He told his sons, "Surely the things the prophet said will all come true." King Jeroboam's son became very sick. Ahijah said to Jeroboam, "God exalted you among the people, yet you did evil. You set up idols and caused the people to sin. Therefore, from now on, when any of your family dies in the city, the dogs will eat them. And if any die in the field, the birds will eat them. None will have a proper burial. But as for your son, when you go home and enter the city, he will die. He will be given a proper burial with honor. He is the only person in all your house that has done one good thing for God."
Elijah and King Ahab. 1 Kings 16 through 18. When the kingdom was divided, Omri, the wicked king of the 10 northern tribes, made Samaria the capital of Israel. All of Israel's kings were bad, while some of Judah's kings were good. The worst of Israel's kings was Omri's son, King Ahab. He did more things to make God angry than all of Israel's kings before him. His wife, wicked Queen Jezebel, encouraged him to even greater evil. Elijah the Tishbite, a prophet of God, said to Ahab, "Because of your evil, there will be no rain in the land until I say so." This made Ahab want to kill Elijah. To hide him from King Ahab, God sent Elijah to the brook of Cherith and told him, "I have commanded the ravens to feed you." The ravens brought Elijah bread and meat both morning and evening. He drank water from the brook until it dried up. Then God said, "Go to Zarephath in Sidon. I have a widow there who will feed you." Elijah went to Zarephath and found a widow gathering sticks. He called, "Please bring me a little water to drink and some bread." She said, "I do not have any bread. All I have left is a little flour and oil. After my son and I eat it, there will be no more left, so we will soon die." Elijah said, "Fear not. Feed me first, then your son and yourself. God has promised that you will never run out of the flour and oil until he makes it rain." She did as Elijah asked. Elijah stayed with them, and they always had food to eat, just as God promised. Then the widow's son got sick and died. Elijah carried the boy to the room upstairs and prayed, saying, "O Lord, my God, let this child's soul come into him again." Elijah stretched himself upon the boy 3 times. The boy suddenly came back to life, and Elijah gave him to his mother. She said to Elijah, "Now I know that you are a man of God. The words you speak are from God and are truth." After 3 years of no rain, God sent Elijah to Ahab. When Ahab saw him, Ahab said, "You troubler of Israel?" Elijah said, "You are the troublemaker. Now call the Israelites to Mount Carmel with the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah who eat at Jezebel's table." Elijah challenged the people by saying, "How long are you going to keep limping between the 2 sides? If the Lord is God, follow him. If the idol Baal is God, follow him. The prophets of Baal will build an altar to Baal, and I will build an altar to God. We will each put an ox on it for a sacrifice, but we will not light the fire. The God who answers by fire, he is God." The people agreed. All went to watch the contest at Mount Carmel. Elijah said, "You are many, so you go first. Call on your God to light the fire." Starting from early morning, the false prophets called out, "O Baal, hear us!" They leaped about their altar. At noontime, Elijah mocked them. "Cry louder! He might be thinking, or on a trip, or maybe he's asleep, and you have to wake him up." They cried aloud and cut themselves until the blood poured from them. They did this until evening, but there was no answer. Then Elijah called the people to him and fixed God's altar, rebuilding it with 12 stones, 1 for each tribe of Israel. He dug a trench around the altar, put on the wood and the ox, then had water poured upon the ox and wood and into the trench, so that all was drenched. Then Elijah prayed out loud, "My God, let it be known today that you are God. Turn their hearts back to you." Suddenly fire fell from heaven, burning up the offering, the wood, the stones, the dust, and licked up all the water. The people said, "Jehovah is God," and fell down, worshiping him. The false prophets were put to death. Next, Elijah went to the top of Mount Carmel and prayed for rain. He sent his servant to look for a rain cloud. The first time, his servant saw nothing. He did this 6 more times. On the 7th time, the servant said, "I see a cloud, as small as a man's hand." Elijah said, "Hurry! The rain is coming." He gathered up his robe and fled before the cloud. God gave him the speed to outrun Ahab's chariot down the mountain. The sky blackened and rain poured down. Then the seasons returned to normal. Elijah was just like us, yet he prayed and it did not rain for 3.5 years. Then he prayed again and it rained hard. God comforts Elijah. 1 Kings 19-20. King Ahab told his wife, Queen Jezebel, all that Elijah had done on Mount Carmel and how Elijah had killed the false prophets. Jezebel became enraged and sent soldiers out to kill Elijah. He ran for his life to the wilderness near Beersheba and sat down under a broom tree. He said, "I've had enough, God. Take my life." He lay down and slept. An angel touched him and said, "Rise up and eat." Right before him was fresh, warm bread and plenty of water. He slept once more, and the angel woke him again. "Eat, for the journey you must take will require much energy." After eating the second time, Elijah journeyed for 40 days on the strength of that food. He ended up at a cave in Mount Sinai, the mountain of God, where God had given Moses the 10 Commandments. Then God asked him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" Elijah answered, "I have worked hard for you, but the children of Israel have turned away from you and have torn down your altars and killed your prophets. Now I am the only one left, and they are trying to kill me too." God said, "Go and stand upon the mountain." A great and strong wind blew, breaking up rocks, but God was not in the wind. Then an earthquake shook the ground, but God was not in the earthquake. Next came fire, but God was not in the fire. Finally, a still small voice came. When Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his mantle and went out to stand in the entrance of the cave. God said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" Elijah gave the same answer, that he was all alone and that the queen was trying to kill him. God said, "Return by way of Damascus and anoint Hazael as king over Syria. Anoint Jehu king of Israel and Elisha to be prophet in your place, for there are 7,000 in Israel who have refused to bow to Baal." When Elijah found Elisha, he was plowing with 12 pairs of oxen before him. Elijah threw his mantle over Elisha. Elisha followed Elijah to become the next prophet. Later, Ben-Hadad, king of Syria, gathered 32 kings and went to war against Israel, surrounding the city of Samaria. He bragged to Ahab, saying, "By this time tomorrow, your silver, gold, wives, and all you own will be mine." Ahab said, "Let not the one who puts on his armor brag like the one who takes it off." A prophet came to Ahab and said, "You must attack the invaders. God will deliver this enemy into your hand." Ahab gathered 7,000 men and 232 rulers and attacked in the middle of the day. Ben-Hadad and the 32 kings were drunk, so they fled, giving the Israelites a great victory. Later that year, Ben-Hadad said, "The God of Israel is a God of the hills and mountains. If we attack them on the plains, we will win." So they attacked Israel on the plains and lost again, because God was fighting for the Israelites. Ben-Hadad escaped and sent word to Ahab asking for mercy. Ahab said, "Is he alive? Ben-Hadad is my friend." Then Ahab took Ben-Hadad in his chariot and made an agreement with him. Because Ahab had not destroyed Ben-Hadad, God sent a prophet to Ahab. But first the prophet went to another prophet. "Strike me," he said. "It is God's will." But the other refused. The first said, "Because you have refused to obey God's word, a lion will kill you." As soon as that prophet left, a lion killed him. The first prophet found another prophet. "Strike me!" This one wounded him, as he had asked. Then the wounded prophet disguised himself and waited for King Ahab to go by. He cried to the king, "I was in the middle of the battle, and a man said to me, 'Keep this prisoner. If he escapes, you will pay with your life.' And as I was busy here and there, the man was gone." Ahab said, "You have judged yourself. You will die." The prophet removed his disguise and said, "You have just judged yourself. God says, 'Because you have let Ben-Hadad go, whom I, God, told you to destroy, you will pay with your life.'" Then King Ahab went home pouting. Naboth's vineyard. 1 Kings 21 through 22. King Ahab decided he wanted a vineyard in Jezreel, but it was owned by Naboth. Ahab said, "Give me your vineyard. I want to make it an herb garden because it is near my house. I will give you a better vineyard, or I'll pay you for it." Naboth said, "I cannot do that. God has forbidden us to sell the inheritance of our fathers." Ahab returned to his house and sulked. He lay down on his bed and turned his face away and wouldn't eat. His wife, Jezebel, said, "What's wrong?" When she heard about Naboth, she said, "Aren't you the king? Cheer up. I'll get the vineyard for you." So she wrote to the elders of the city, saying, "Proclaim a fast and sit Naboth at the head of the people. Have 2 evil men falsely accuse him of cursing God and the king. Then take him out and stone him to death." The men of the city did as Jezebel commanded. When Naboth was dead, she told Ahab, "Naboth has been stoned and is dead. Go ahead and take the vineyard." But when Ahab went to the vineyard, there was Elijah. Elijah said, "Do you kill and take over? God says, 'In the place where the dogs lick the blood of Naboth, so will they lick your blood. And the dogs will eat Jezebel in Jezreel. God will bring a great evil upon you and your house.'" Hearing this, Ahab tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and fasted. God saw how Ahab had humbled himself, so God said, "I will wait to bring the evil on Ahab's house after he is gone." 3 years later, Ahab joined with Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, to fight against the Syrians. They asked the prophets whether or not they would win. The false prophets, 400 of them, said they would. But God's prophet, Micaiah, said, "I see Israel scattered as sheep without a shepherd, a people without a leader. Don't go to war." Ahab didn't like this prophecy, so had Micaiah thrown in prison and said, "Don't let him out until I return safely." Ahab disguised himself as a soldier and went into battle, but an arrow hit in the gaps of his armor, and his blood flowed into the bottom of his chariot. He died, and the men washed the chariot by the pool of Samaria, where the dogs licked the blood as God had said. Ahab had reigned 22 years over Israel. His son, Ahaziah, ruled in his place. Elijah and the captains. 2 Kings 1. King Ahab's son, Ahaziah, ruled Israel after Ahab died. One day, Ahaziah fell through the lattice in his upper chamber. He became sick and sent messengers to inquire of the idol Baal-zebub if he would get well. God sent Elijah to meet the messengers. "Is there no God in Israel that you go to an idol? Listen now, Ahaziah, you will die without rising from your bed." The king became angry and sent a captain with 50 men to capture Elijah. Elijah was sitting on a hill, and the captain said, "Man of God, the king says, come down." Elijah said, "If I am a man of God, let fire come down from heaven and consume you and your 50. And it did. And again the king sent a captain with 50 men. The captain said, "Man of God, the king has said, come down." Elijah said, "If I be a man of God, let fire come down from heaven and consume you and your 50. And again Ahaziah sent a third captain of 50. This captain fell on his knees before Elijah. "Man of God, I pray, please spare my life and the lives of these 50. An angel told Elijah, "Go down with him and do not be afraid." So Elijah went to the king and repeated his prophecy that the king would die. King Ahaziah soon died, just as Elijah had said.
Elijah goes to heaven. 2 Kings 2. Now it came time for God to take Elijah to heaven. Elijah told Elisha to stay behind at Gilgal, but Elijah said, "I will not leave you." So they went to the Jordan River, and Elijah took off his mantle and struck the waters. The river divided so they could cross on dry ground. Then Elijah said to Elisha, "Is there anything you want me to do for you before I go?" Elisha said,
I want the same power of spirit that you have." Elijah said, "You ask a hard thing, but if you are able to see me when I am taken from you, your wish will be granted." As they talked, a chariot of fire appeared, being pulled by horses of fire, and a whirlwind carried Elijah up into heaven. Only Elijah's mantle was left. Elijah saw all this and said, my father, the chariots and horsemen of Israel." When he saw Elijah no more, he tore his clothes in half, took up Elijah's mantle, and struck the Jordan River with it. The waters divided, and Elisha crossed back over. Elisha's miracles. 2 Kings 2-4, 6. The men of a city told Elisha that their spring of water was bad, so that the plants wouldn't bear any fruit. Elisha took a jar of salt and threw salt into the spring, healing it by God's power. Then Elisha went to Bethel. A large group of young men came out of the city and mocked him, saying, "Go on, Baldy, Baldy." Elisha cursed them in the name of God. 2 she-bears came out of the woods and tore up 42 of them. Later, Mesha, the king of Moab, rebelled against Israel's rule. So the king of Israel got the kings of Edom and of Judah to join him. In search of Mesha, the 3 kings led their armies through the wilderness of Edom, but found no water and thought they might die. They sent to Elisha for help. Elisha said, "Why are you asking me? Call the false prophets of your father Ahab, or those prophets of your mother Jezebel. But since the king of Judah is with you, God will help you. Dig this valley full of trenches. In the morning, even though it will not rain, the valley will be filled with water. That is such a small thing for God to do, but God will also let you defeat the king of Moab." The next morning, the valley was filled with water, although there had been no rain. The Moabite soldiers looked into the rising sun and saw the water reflecting red and thought it was blood. They decided the armies of the 3 kings must have fought among themselves, so they hurried to rob the bodies. As they rushed in, the Israelites killed them. In this way, God destroyed many of the Moabites. On another day, a widow cried out to Elisha, "My husband is dead, and the bill collector has come to take my 2 sons to pay our debt." Elisha asked, "What do you have in your house?" She replied, "Nothing except a pot of oil." "Go borrow a lot of empty vessels from your neighbors. Shut your door and pour your oil into the jars." The widow and her sons gathered all the jars that they could borrow and poured the oil into them. The oil continued to flow until all the jars were full. Then Elijah said, "Sell the oil and pay your debt, and live on the rest." Elisha often passed Shunem, where a woman lived with her husband. She had her husband build a small room and furnish it, so when Elisha came by, he had a place to stay. To reward her, God blessed her with a son, even though she was old. The son grew older. One day he was out in the field with his father and the workers. All of a sudden he collapsed and later died. Then his mother laid him on Elisha's bed, had a donkey saddled, and rode to Carmel where Elisha was. Elisha sent his servant Gehazi ahead to lay his staff on the boy, but the boy stayed dead. So Elijah went to her house and prayed to God. He stretched himself upon the child eye to eye and hand to hand, and the child became warm. Then Elisha got up and walked around the house and tried again. This time the boy sneezed 7 times and opened his eyes. Elisha presented the boy alive to his mother. Another time, Elisha went to Gilgal. There was not much food at that time, and the people gathered wild gourds and put them in a pot to eat. But one man accidentally gathered a poisonous gourd and threw it into the pot of stew. When they realized they were being poisoned, they cried out to Elijah, "O man of God, there is death in the pot!" Elisha threw flour into the stew and made it safe for all to eat. Once a man brought Elijah 20 loaves of bread and fresh grain in a sack. Elisha said, "Give it to the people that they may eat." "What? This isn't enough for 100 men." "God says there will be enough for all and still some left over." So he set it before them, and they ate and had food left over, just as God said. Some time later, the sons of the prophets said to Elijah, "This place is too small for all of us. Let us go to the Jordan and get wood to build a larger place." They asked Elisha to go with them. While one was cutting down a tree, the iron axe head fell into the water and was lost. It was valuable, and the man cried out, "Alas, master, for it was borrowed." Elisha threw a stick into the water. The axe head floated to the top so that the man could recover it. Naaman and small things. 2 Kings 5. Naaman, a captain of the Syrian army, was a great and mighty man and honorable, but he had leprosy. This terrible skin disease caused the feet and hands to eventually rot away and even brought death. Naaman's wife had a slave, a little Israeli girl. The girl said to the wife, "If my master were in Samaria, the prophet there could make him well." Naaman heard this and told the king of Syria. The king sent a lot of money along with a letter to the king of Israel, saying, "I have sent Naaman to you, heal him of his leprosy." The king of Israel said, "Am I God, to make and take life? I cannot do this. He is looking for a reason to fight me." But Elisha said, "Send him to me. I will show him there is a prophet of God in Israel." Naaman came to the house of Elisha and stopped outside his door. Elisha sent a messenger out to Naaman, saying, "Go dip yourself in the Jordan River 7 times, and you will be cleansed of your leprosy." This made Naaman angry. "I thought he would surely come out and call on the name of his God and wave his hands over me to heal me." The rivers of Damascus, Abana, and Pharpar are far better than any river of Israel. I can wash myself in them. So he turned and rode off enraged. But his servants said, "Sir, if the prophet had told you to do some great thing, wouldn't you have done it? Why not do this small thing?" So Naaman dipped in the Jordan River according to the saying of the man of God. And on the 7th time, his skin became as clean as a little child's. Then Naaman returned to Elisha and said, "Now I know there is no God in all the world except in Israel. Please accept the gift from your servant." Elijah said, "No, thank you." Then Naaman took 2 mule loads of dirt back with him so he could pray on Jewish soil. Elijah's servant, Gehazi, waited until Naaman went away. Then he ran after him. Naaman got down from the chariot to meet him. "Is everything all right?" Naaman asked. Gehazi said, "Yes, but 2 sons of the prophets came, and my master sent me to ask for a talent of silver, 75 pounds, and clothing for them." Naaman insisted he take the clothes and 2 talents of silver. Gehazi returned to the house and hid his guilty treasure inside. When Gehazi went into Elisha, Elijah said, "Where have you been?" Gehazi said, "Nowhere." Elisha said, "Didn't I see you at Naaman's chariot? Is it a time to receive treasure? Therefore, the leprosy of Naaman will be on you and your house forever." Gehazi left the house with leprosy so bad it turned his skin white as snow. Naaman's disease was now his. Elisha and the Syrians. 2 Kings 6-9. When the Syrians were at war with Israel, Elisha would warn the king of Israel where the enemy was going to attack. This really made the king of Syria mad. "Who is the traitor telling the king of Israel my plans?" the Syrian king demanded of his people. "It's none of us," said his servants. "Elisha, the prophet in Israel, tells his king what you secretly say in your own bedroom." "Where is he, that I might capture him?" "The city of Dothan," they replied. So the king of Syria sent a great army to surround Dothan. The next morning, when Elisha's servant looked out, he saw the army and cried, "Oh no! What are we going to do?" Elisha said, "Fear not, for those who are with us are more than those who are with them." Then Elisha prayed, "O God, please open his eyes that he may see." God opened the young servant's eyes, and he saw the mountains were full of horses and chariots of fire around Elisha. This was God's invisible army just waiting to follow his orders. Elisha prayed for God to close the minds of the enemy soldiers so they did not understand what they were seeing. Then Elijah told them, "This is not the road, and this is not the city. Follow me, and I will lead you to the man you seek." And he led them into the city of Samaria. Again he prayed, "O Lord, let these men see." God opened their minds again, and they saw that they were in the middle of Samaria, surrounded by their enemies. The king of Israel said, "Can I kill them? Can I kill them?" Elisha said, "No, you would not kill them if you took them captive. Feed them and send them home." This ended the war between Syria and Israel for a time. Later, the king of Syria gathered an army and surrounded the city of Samaria. The army cut off all food supplies so that the people were starving and ate rats and donkey heads to stay alive. The king of Israel thought that this disaster was caused by Elisha and decided to kill him. Elisha said, "Wait, tomorrow there will be an abundance of food." Early the next morning, 4 lepers stood at the gate of the city. They said, "Why wait here? If we go into the city where there is no food, we will die. If we stay here, we will die. So let us go to the Syrian camp and surrender. No matter where we go, we will probably die." So they went into the Syrian camp at twilight and found no one there. Earlier, the Syrian army had heard the noise of a great army marching, of chariots and horses. They thought that Israel had joined the Egyptian and Hittite kings and were coming to fight them. They dropped everything and ran, leaving tents, weapons, food, and animals behind. The lepers ate and drank and took some gold and silver and hid it, then said to each other, "What we are doing is not right. This is a day of such good news. We must tell the people in the city. If we wait until daylight, we will be punished." So they told the city gatekeepers, who shouted the news. Now the king of Israel thought the Syrians were setting up a trap, so he sent 2 chariots to check things out. They followed a trail of clothes and things thrown away by the Syrians all the way to the Jordan River, then came back. The people, hearing the good news, rushed out of the city and helped themselves to what the Syrians had left behind. Later, the king of Syria became sick. He sent Hazael to Elisha to see if he would get well again. Elisha said, "Tell him, yes, you will recover, but God has shown me that he will die." Then Elisha looked with sadness upon Hazael and said, "You will cause great suffering to the Israelites." Hazael asked, "But how can I do that?" Elijah answered, Because you will be the next king of Syria. Hazael returned to the king and said, You will recover. The next day, Hazael took a wet cloth and smothered the king. Hazael was now the king of Syria. Jehu destroys Ahab's family. 2 Kings 9 through 10. Elisha sent a messenger to Jehu. Elisha told the messenger, Get Jehu apart from the others. Tell him he is to destroy the family of Ahab and Jezebel. Anoint Jehu as the next king of Israel, then run. Ahab's son, King Joram, had been wounded fighting the king of Syria, and Ahaziah, king of Judah, had gone to help him. They were together in Jezreel, when the lookout in the tower called out, I see a company of our soldiers. King Joram said, Send a rider to meet them. Ask, Is it peace with Syria? The first rider did not return. So Joram sent a second. As the soldiers grew near, the lookout said, That rider is not coming back either. It looks like Jehu is driving the lead chariot, for he drives like a madman. Eager to hear the news, Joram and Ahaziah rode out, each in their own chariot. Is it peace? They asked Jehu. How can it be peace, as long as the evil of your mother Jezebel continues? Traitor! Cried Joram, and turned his chariot to flee. Jehu shot an arrow, killing him. Cast him in the field of Naboth, Jehu ordered. Then he chased Ahaziah and wounded him. King Ahaziah was able to escape to Megiddo, but he died there. Queen Jezebel was at Jezreel. She looked out the window and called, Is that you, you murderer? Jehu yelled out, Who is on my side? Some eunuchs looked out the window. Jehu said, Throw her down. So they threw Jezebel out the window, and the horses trampled her. Jehu went in to eat and drink. Then he said, Go bury that wicked woman, for after all, she was a king's daughter. But when they searched the area, they found only parts of her. It is as God said, because of what Jezebel did to Naboth, dogs will eat her, and no one will be able to say, Here is her grave. Jehu killed all of Ahab's sons, Ahaziah's brothers, and the evil priests of Baal. He then destroyed the idols of Baal, doing God's will. But Jehu still worshipped the 2 calves that Jeroboam had set up, doing wrong in another way. Joash, king of Judah, 2 Kings 11 through 13. When Athaliah, queen mother of Judah, learned that her son, King Ahaziah, was dead, she tried to kill all of his children so that she could rule Judah. She murdered the entire royal family except for Ahaziah's infant son, Joash, who was hidden in the temple by Ahaziah's sister. Then the priest Jehoiada hid him for 6 years. When Joash was 7 years old, Jehoiada named him king. Queen Athaliah heard the noise of all the people making Joash the king and came to see what had caused the celebration. When she saw the new king, she cried, Treason! Treason! Jehoiada ordered her taken away and killed. Joash did what was right in God's eyes all the years that he listened to the priest Jehoiada. During the early years of Joash's reign, a huge swarm of locusts passed through the land. The prophet Joel used this to warn the people to obey God or perish under an army that would come like the locusts and destroy the land. Joash, or Jehoash as he is also known, ordered the temple repaired. The people of Judah brought money and put it in a collection chest that the priest Jehoiada made by drilling a hole through the lid. The workers were honest and faithful, so that no one had to keep a record of the money given to them. Hazael, king of Syria, decided to invade Jerusalem. So Joash gathered all the gold in his own house and in God's house and sent it to Hazael, paying him to leave Jerusalem alone. At this time, Joash, king of Israel, learned that God's great prophet Elisha was deathly sick and went to visit him. Elisha called in the king of Israel and told him to shoot an arrow out the window. That is, God's arrow of victory that he will give you over Syria. Then he told the king to take the other arrows and hit the ground. The king hit the ground 3 times. You should have hit it 5 or 6 times, said Elisha. Then you would have had total victory over Syria. Now you will only win 3 battles. Elisha died, and they buried him. At the beginning of the year, a band of Moabites invaded Israel. As the Israelites were burying a man, they saw the Moabites and quickly put the body in Elisha's grave. As soon as the body touched Elisha's, the man came back to life. Soon afterwards, Joash, king of Judah, was killed by his own servants.
God sends prophets. 2 Kings 14 through 17. During the next 60 years, between 790 BC and 720 BC, the kings of Israel, who were all evil, led the nation into so much wickedness that God sent the people of Israel into captivity. In the middle of the reign of Jeroboam II of Israel, God sent Jonah to Nineveh to tell the people to stop sinning. The wicked people of Nineveh repented and stopped their sin, but the Israelites did not. To God, the people of Israel were in the same kind of relationship with him as a wife is to her husband. To show how much idol worship hurt God's feelings, he had the prophet Hosea marry an unfaithful woman. She treated Hosea just like Israel was treating God. God also had Amos, a shepherd prophet, speak out against Israel and several other countries. Yet Israel kept getting more and more wicked. At the same time, Micah preached to the people of Judah. He told about the coming of the great Messiah who would be born in Bethlehem. King Uzziah, also known as Azariah, ruled Judah well for many years. He directed the building of many fortresses and towers and a large, well-trained army. King Uzziah's fame spread far and wide. One day, he became full of pride and entered the temple to burn incense on the altar. Only the priests were allowed to do this, and one of them stopped the king. Uzziah got really angry, so God struck Uzziah with leprosy. From then on, the king had to live away from other people. God's prophet, Isaiah, started to preach during the days of King Uzziah. Isaiah said, "Judah is like a vineyard that has the best care, yet only yields bad fruit." Uzziah's grandson, Ahaz, was king of Judah when the king of Assyria successfully invaded Israel. Frightened, Syria, Judah, and Israel joined together to fight against Assyria. God sent Isaiah to tell King Ahaz to put his trust in God and he would be safe. Ahaz agreed to put his faith in God's word, and the Israelites won their battles against their enemies. When King Ahaz died, his son, Hezekiah, took his place as the new king of Judah. King Hezekiah was a good king who restored the people's faith in God. He looked to Isaiah for guidance to help him during the Assyrian invasions. Isaiah said, "Only faith in God will protect you from the Syrians." Hezekiah's faith saved the city of Jerusalem and the country of Judah. However, it was a different matter in the northern country of Israel.
because neither the king nor his people would turn to God. The Assyrians killed most of them. The rest were taken captive and scattered among the other conquered countries. This ended the northern kingdom of Israel. People from other countries were sent to live in Israel. These people, called Samaritans, did not worship God, so he sent lions in to kill them. The king of Assyria sent one of the Israelite priests back to teach them how to worship God. Then the lions left. The Samaritans continued to worship God, but they also worshipped the idols of the lands they had come from, so they never really followed God's commandments. Hezekiah obeys God. 2 Kings 18 through 20, 2 Chronicles 31. Hezekiah was 25 years old when he became king of Judah. A good king, he destroyed the places of idol worship and trusted in God. In Hezekiah's 14th year, Sennacherib, the new king of Assyria, captured the cities of Judah and surrounded Jerusalem. The general of Sennacherib's army called out to the people of Jerusalem, saying, "Do not ask Egypt for help, for Pharaoh is like a bent reed that will cut your hand if you lean on it. And do not trust in Jehovah God, for Hezekiah has torn down the high places of worship and made you worship only in Jerusalem. Don't let Hezekiah trick you, for he can't save you from me. Neither trust in Jehovah, for Jehovah cannot deliver you. Has any of the gods of the other nations kept us from conquering them? So who is Jehovah that you think he can save you?" The people kept quiet and did not answer him, for Hezekiah had said, "Answer him not a word." When Hezekiah heard the words of the Assyrian general, he tore his clothes and dressed in sackcloth. He sent messengers to the prophet Isaiah, saying, "This is a day of trouble. Will God save us?" Isaiah said, "Do not be afraid of the words of the king of Assyria. He will hear a rumor and return to his own country. There he will die by the sword." Sennacherib sent a messenger with a letter saying again, "Don't trust in your God to save you. Have the gods of the other nations saved them?" Hezekiah received the message and took it to the temple and spread it out before God. Hezekiah prayed, saying, "O God, who sits above the cherubim, you alone are God of all the kingdoms. You have made heaven and earth. See the words of Sennacherib insulting you? Sennacherib has destroyed the nations whose gods are of wood and stone. They are not gods at all, but simply the works of men's hands. Please save us from Sennacherib, that all may know that you alone are God of all the earth." Then God told Isaiah to send a message to Hezekiah, saying, "God has heard your prayer. He says to the Assyrians, 'Your messengers have defied me. I have heard your arrogant speech. Therefore I will put my hook in your nose and my bridle in your lips, and I will turn you back the way you came.' And to you, Hezekiah, God says, 'Judah will again prosper. The king of Assyria will not come into this city, nor shoot an arrow here, nor set up a siege mound against it. I will defend this city to save it, for my sake and the sake of my servant David.'" That night, an angel of God went through the Assyrian camp and killed 185,000 enemy soldiers. When the others got up in the morning, they saw the dead soldiers and left immediately to return to their own land. Ashamed, King Sennacherib returned to Nineveh. As he worshipped his idol, 2 of his sons killed him with a sword, just as Isaiah had prophesied. Later, Hezekiah became very sick. Isaiah came and said, "God says for you to set your house in order, for you will die." Hezekiah turned his face to the wall and wept bitterly. He prayed to God to let him live longer, since he had walked before God in truth and with a whole heart, and had done what was good in God's eyes. Isaiah left him and had reached the center of Jerusalem when God stopped him and said, Go back and tell Hezekiah, I, God, have heard your prayer. I have seen your tears. Therefore, I will add 15 years to your life and keep the Assyrians away from Jerusalem. Hezekiah asked for a sign that this would happen. So God caused the shadow of the sun to go backward 10 steps on the staircase, making the day last longer. Upon hearing that Hezekiah was sick, the king of Babylon sent him some presents. So Hezekiah showed the Babylonian messengers all the silver and gold and treasures of Judah. Later Isaiah said, "Where did these men come from?" Hezekiah said, "From a far country, Babylon." Isaiah said, "Someday all these treasures and some of your sons shall be taken to Babylon. Nothing shall be left here." Hezekiah ruled for 29 years, and there was peace and truth in the days of Hezekiah. After his death, his son Manasseh ruled.
Evil Manasseh's rule and good Josiah's reforms. 2 Kings 21 through 23, 2 Chronicles 33. Manasseh became king of Judah at the age of 12 and led the people into doing evil. He rebuilt the altars to the idols and practiced witchcraft. He shed innocent blood for the 55 years he ruled. God said, "Because of all the innocent blood shed by Manasseh, I will bring destruction on the people of Judah and Jerusalem, so that whoever hears of it, their ears will tingle. I will wipe Jerusalem as a man wipes a dish and turns it upside down. I will deliver them into the hands of their enemies because of their evil ways." God let the king of Assyria put a hook in Manasseh's nose and take him prisoner to Babylon. There, Manasseh, in his great distress, repented of his evil ways and humbled himself before God. God heard his plea and returned him to Jerusalem. Manasseh now knew that the Lord really was the true God. Manasseh removed the idols and altars he had built and worshiped God only. At this time, Nahum prophesied against Nineveh, the capital of Assyria, predicting its destruction. Nahum said, "Your guards are like locusts that settle on the walls on a cold day, but when the sun appears, they fly away and no one knows where." Manasseh died, and his son Amon ruled for 2 years. Amon was evil and was killed by his own officials. His son Josiah became king in his place. Josiah became king when he was only 8 years old. He did what was right in God's eyes, turning to God with all his heart and all his soul and all his might. During Josiah's reign, Zephaniah prophesied about the day of the Lord. God's judgment would come to Judah and Jerusalem because of their sins and idol worship. The day would be of great distress, as if the world were coming to an end. Also, Jeremiah began preaching in Judah. He was a youth at the time and preached all during the destruction of Jerusalem. He foretold the destruction of Jerusalem, saying, "This is what God says. Listen. I am bringing on the city every disaster I spoke against them, because they are stubborn and will not listen to my instructions." In Josiah's 18th year, Josiah had the temple repaired. During the repairs, Hilkiah, the priest, found the book of the law of Moses. He gave the book to Shaphan, the scribe, who read the book to King Josiah. Josiah tore his robes and said, "Go ask God about what is written in the book, for our fathers have not kept the word of the Lord our God." Huldah, the prophetess, told them that God said, "I will bring destruction upon this place and its people, because Judah has forsaken me. But Josiah has humbled himself, so I will not bring this disaster while he lives." Josiah went through the land, destroying the altars of the idols. He destroyed the altar of Jeroboam in Bethel, as had been foretold. One day Josiah went out to fight against Pharaoh Necho, king of Egypt. Pharaoh Necho was fighting against the king of Assyria on the plain of Megiddo and did not want to fight Josiah too. King Josiah wore a disguise so that he could join in the battle. When archers shot him, King Josiah said, "Take me away, for I'm badly wounded." Josiah was taken in a chariot back to Jerusalem, where he died and was buried. The nation of Judah then turned away from following God and went back to worshiping idols. Josiah's son, Jehoahaz, took over as king in the place of his father, but he was evil, and soon God had him taken into captivity in Egypt. A brother of Jehoahaz, named Jehoiakim, ruled for the next 11 years. He did evil also in God's eyes, just like the earlier kings had done. Destruction of Jerusalem. 2 Kings 24. In 605 BC, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon captured Jerusalem, carried off a few of the choicest prisoners. Nebuchadnezzar made Jehoiakim's 18-year-old son the new ruler of Judah. Jehoiakim ruled for 3 months, but he was evil. Jeremiah compared Jehoiakim and all his officials to bad figs, fit only to be destroyed. He said, "They are bad figs, very bad, which cannot be eaten due to rottenness." When King Jehoiakim rebelled, he and 10,000 Jews were carried off to Babylon. All the warriors, craftsmen, and skilled laborers were taken away as prisoners. Only the poorest of the poor were left to tend the vineyards and to farm the land. Nebuchadnezzar also took all the treasures from the king's house and God's temple to Babylon. He set up Jehoiakim's uncle, Zedekiah, to rule in his place. Jeremiah told the people, "Build houses in Babylon and settle down, plant fields, marry, and have sons and daughters. God will bring you back in 70 years. He will allow Babylon to conquer many nations. Later, God will punish and destroy Babylon. No people will ever live in that great city again. Only creatures of the desert will live there." A second large group of captives was taken to Babylon. This included Ezekiel, who settled near the river Chebar. Ezekiel saw visions from God, showing him the captivity that was coming soon upon Jerusalem. Not enough righteous people were left to save the nation. Ezekiel said, even if Noah, Daniel, and Job were in it, they could save neither son nor daughter. They could only save themselves. In 586 BC, Zedekiah rebelled against Babylon. This time, Nebuchadnezzar tore down the city wall, destroyed the city, and burned the temple. Only a few people were left, including Jeremiah. Jeremiah said, "There will come a time when the people are restored to this land. Also, there will come a time when God will make a new covenant with the people. It will be written on their hearts. God will be their God, and they will be his people. They will all know him, from the least to the greatest." This foretold the coming of the kingdom of God under Jesus Christ. Jeremiah remained in Judah. He wrote the book of Lamentations at this time, grieving at the loss of the city of Jerusalem. A rebellious group of people in Judah forced Jeremiah to go with them into Egypt, where he probably died. After Nebuchadnezzar's death, his son, Evil-Merodach, ruled for 2 years. He dealt kindly with Jehoiakim and released him from prison.
Ezra. End of Babylonian captivity. Ezra 1-6. In 539 BC, the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, God stirred up the spirit of Cyrus. Cyrus announced, "The God of heaven has given me all the kingdoms of the earth. He has charged me to build him a house in Jerusalem. Whoever among you are his people, let him go to Jerusalem and rebuild God's house. Whoever stays here may help, if they wish, by giving silver and gold and gifts for the house of God in Jerusalem."
Cyrus gave the temple vessels that Nebuchadnezzar had stolen many years ago back to the Jews who were returning to Jerusalem. The first Jews to return were under Zerubbabel, who was appointed governor. They settled in their towns, then started to build the temple. God-loving Israelites from all the tribes returned at this time, a few from each of the northern tribes, and more from the southern tribes, according to the prophecy of Jeremiah. I will gather the remnant of my flock out of all the countries where I have driven them, and I will bring them again to their folds. Some of the kings who ruled Persia after Cyrus stopped the work on the temple, while other kings of Persia would let it start again. Also, the Israelites would stop working on the temple while they farmed their own land and built their own houses. At this time, Haggai and Zechariah preached to the people. The prophet Haggai said, "You have not put God first in your lives, so you keep having droughts and other problems that take away your money. If you would put God first, He will open His storehouse of plenty, and you will be blessed." The prophet Zechariah encouraged the governor, Zerubbabel, to keep rebuilding the temple. He told Zerubbabel, "Not by might nor power, but by my Spirit, says the Lord Almighty. You have laid the foundation of this temple. You will also complete it. Then you will know that God Almighty has sent me to you." Ezra goes to Jerusalem. Ezra 7 through 10. About 60 years after the first Jews were allowed to return to Jerusalem from captivity, King Artaxerxes of Persia put a priest named Ezra in charge of finishing the temple. The king ordered the temple furnished with the necessary utensils and its treasuries filled with the freewill offerings of gold and silver from the people of Babylon. These were to be carried back to Jerusalem by Ezra. To prepare for the return trip to Jerusalem, the people returning camped for 3 days outside the city of Babylon to organize their caravan. Ezra went among them to make sure that there were people from the 12 tribes of Israel, but he found no Levites. So he sent out a call for Levites to join them, for only they could serve in the temple according to the law of God. Ezra then asked all the returning people to fast, eat no food, for 1 day, to show their humility before God and to ask God for His protection during their journey. They were carrying a great amount of wealth, and there were enemies all along the way that would like to ambush their caravan and steal all their riches. God answered their prayer, giving them a safe journey back home to Jerusalem. Shortly after their arrival, the temple treasures were dedicated. Then the officials of the temple brought Ezra bad news. The people who had come to Jerusalem under Zerubbabel were marrying women from the enemy nations. They were non-believers who would not follow God. This troubled Ezra deeply, for he knew that this was the main reason the people had stopped worshiping God before the Babylonian captivity. The non-believers would get the believers and their children to leave God and worship idols. Ezra read the law to the people and told them they could not marry non-believers. While Ezra prayed over the unfaithfulness of the people and wept bitterly, a great assembly of men, women, and children gathered around him. One of the men stepped forward. He told Ezra, "There is still hope in Israel, for the people know what God has done for them." These people agreed to separate themselves from the idol worshippers and return to God.
Nehemiah. My name is Nehemiah. I live in Susa at the palace of King Artaxerxes, the son of Xerxes. I am the cupbearer and food taster for the king. My story takes place in 445 BC, 14 years after King Artaxerxes sent Ezra to lead a second group of Jews back to Jerusalem. One day, Hunani, one of my brothers, came from Judah to see me. I asked him, "How are the Jews doing there, and what does Jerusalem look like?" He said, "The people are having great difficulties. Also, the city walls are broken down and the gates are burned." When I heard this, I wept and mourned for several days. Then I fasted and prayed to God. O God of heaven, the great and awesome God who keeps agreements with those who love you, please hear my request. Remember your promise to return your people to Jerusalem, and please give me mercy in the sight of the king. I could not hide my sadness while serving the king, and he said, "Why are you sad, since you are not sick? There is sorrow in your heart." I was afraid, for I had never been sad in front of him. I said, "O king, live forever. I am sad because the city of my fathers is ruined, and the gates are burned down." King Artaxerxes said, "What do you want from me, Nehemiah?" So I prayed to God. Then I said, "If it please my king, would you send me to Jerusalem, that I may rebuild it?" "How long would you be gone?" he asked. I gave him an idea of how long it would take, and asked him for letters permitting me to travel from Susa to Judah. I also asked him for timber from the king's forest to use in rebuilding the gates. The king sent army captains and horsemen with me, which angered our enemies, Sanballat and Tobiah, for they didn't want anyone helping the Jews. 3 days after I reached Jerusalem, I went out at night and looked over the ruins of the city walls and each of the gates. The next day I told the Jewish priests and nobles, "You see how Jerusalem lies in ruins? Come, let us rise and build, for God and the king are with us." So they prepared to do this good work. Then our enemies, Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem, mocked us and laughed aloud, saying, "What is this you do? Will you rebel against King Artaxerxes?" I said, "The God of heaven will help us, but you have no part or right in Jerusalem." So the Jews worked in family groups, each group repairing one section of the wall or one of the gates. When Sanballat saw the walls going up, he was furious and said, "What are these weak and feeble Jews doing?" Tobiah said, "If a fox runs across their walls, it will fall down." I prayed, "Hear how they hate us, O God. Make what they wish upon us happen to them." We kept working, and soon all the wall was connected, for the people had a mind to work. It was half as high as it would be when finished. Sanballat and his men saw this and planned to attack us, but we prayed to God and set watchmen to guard against them. Each man worked with a sword in his hand and the other weapons close by. One man with a trumpet stood by me to sound a warning. If they attacked us in any place, the trumpet would bring the others to that spot. Also, I had everyone spend their nights in Jerusalem, so they could defend the city at night, then work during the day. At that time, the poor people cried out against the nobles, saying, "We must have food during the famine. When we buy it, we are charged such a high rate of interest that we cannot pay. We have sold our land. Now the moneylenders say we must sell our children to them." This made me angry, and I called the nobles to me. "We have brought God's people out of captivity. Now you are putting them back into slavery. This is not good. Give them back their fields, vineyards, olive gardens, and their homes. Also return 100th part of the money and goods that you took from them." And they did as I asked. Now I had been feeding myself and my men and 150 others, plus those who came to us from other nations. I did not take food from the people to do this, but paid for it myself, not wanting to add to the people's burden. The other governors had lived off the people, but I would not do so. I prayed, "Remember, O my God, all the good that I have done for the people." When our enemies heard that there was no hole left in the wall, they asked me to come to a meeting, planning to harm me. But I sent messengers to them, saying, "I am doing a great work. Why should the work stop so I can come to you?" They did this 4 times. The 5th time, they sent a letter that claimed that the Jews planned to rebel against Artaxerxes and that I wanted to be their new king. I said, "You are making this up," and sent them away. They wanted to make us afraid, but instead I prayed for strength. Then Shimei came and said, Nehemiah, let us flee inside the temple and shut the doors, for they plan to come and kill you during the night. I said, should a man like me run and hide? Should I go into the temple to save my life? No way. Then I realized he had been hired by Sanballat to make me afraid, so that I would sin, but I did not fall for the trap. We finished the wall in 52 days. All the nations around us were afraid, for they saw that this was God's work. Then I called upon Ezra to read the law of Moses to everyone. The people started to be sad when they heard the law, for they realized they had not kept it. But Ezra said, this day is holy to God. Rejoice and eat, for you have understood the words. So day by day, Ezra read the law until they had heard it all. Then the people confessed their sins and worshiped God and vowed to keep his law. Earlier, I had left to go to King Artaxerxes for a short time. When I came back to Jerusalem, I found that the priest, Elijah, had given a side room in the temple to Tobiah. I threw out Tobiah's things and filled the room with the vessels of God's house, frankincense, and other things for God's worship. Also, the Jews were not giving any portion of their goods to the Levites, as they were supposed to do, so that the Levites had to go to work in the fields and could not stay and care for God's house. I said, this is not right. Then all the people brought in their portions, tithe, to the temple. I had them close the gates of Jerusalem on the Sabbath, so that all the people who sold things on that day were locked outside. I also told the Jews not to marry idol worshippers from other countries. Remember me, O my God, for good.
Esther. After the temple in Jerusalem was rebuilt, the Jews faced a new danger. The Persian king Xerxes, also called Ahasuerus, gave a huge feast for 180 days. Queen Vashti held a feast of her own for the palace women. Then the king gave a 7-day feast for all those in the palace at Susa. He called for Vashti to be brought out for all to see, wearing her royal crown. When she refused, he asked his wise men, "What should I do about the queen?" They answered, "Queen Vashti has wronged not only the king, but all the princes. All the women in the kingdom will now speak to their husbands this way. Therefore, she should never come into the king's presence again. Let her crown be given to someone more worthy than she." This pleased the king, and he sent for all the beautiful young women in his kingdom to come before him, that he might choose a new queen. A certain Jew named Mordecai lived in Susa. He had raised his cousin Esther as a daughter, because she was an orphan. Esther was very beautiful, and when the king's men gathered all the lovely young maidens, Esther was taken with them. She quickly became a favorite of Hegai, who was in charge of all the women. He gave Esther 7 maids and moved her into the best place in the room. Mordecai had warned her not to tell anyone that she was a Jew. Every day he walked back and forth near the harem to learn how Esther was doing. Each woman was given beauty treatments for 1 year before she was brought before the king. At this time, she could ask for anything she wanted to take with her. When it was Esther's turn, she asked Hegai's advice and took only what he suggested. Esther pleased everyone who saw her, including King Ahasuerus. He loved her above all women and made her his new queen. He even gave a great banquet in her honor. During those days, Mordecai sat at the city gate. One day, he overheard 2 of the king's high officials plotting to kill the king. Mordecai sent word to Esther, and she told the king. After finding out that it was true, the 2 men were hanged, and Mordecai's name written in the king's records. The king appointed a man named Haman to be second in command and ordered that everyone should bow to Haman. But Mordecai would not bow. This enraged Haman. When he found out that Mordecai was a Jew, he decided to kill Mordecai and all the Jewish people in the entire Persian Empire. So Haman told King Ahasuerus, "A certain people are scattered through the empire who do not keep the king's laws. It is not wise for you to let them live. If you please, let them be destroyed. I'll pay about 375 tons of silver for this to be done." The king gave Haman his signet ring, saying, "Keep your silver and do as you like with the people." Haman called in the royal scribes and had them write letters in all the languages of the empire. He had them written in the name of King Ahasuerus, sealed with the king's ring, and sent out. The letters said, "You are to destroy, to slay, and to cause to die all Jews, young and old, on a certain day." All the Jews mourned greatly, for there was nothing they could do. When Mordecai heard what Haman had done, he tore his clothes and cried bitterly. He sat before the king's gate in sackcloth. Esther's maidens told her about Mordecai, and she sent him some good clothes to wear. When he refused, she sent Hathach, one of her attendants, to find out what was wrong. Hathach returned with a copy of Haman's letter, and this message from Mordecai: "Ask the king for his mercy and beg him not to kill your people." Esther sent Hathach back to Mordecai, saying, "Whoever goes to the king in his inner chamber without first being invited will be put to death. They are allowed to live only if the king holds out his golden scepter to them. I haven't been called to the king for 30 days, and he kills people for the slightest reason." Mordecai said, "Don't think that you'll live when all the other Jews are killed just because you are in the king's house. If you stay quiet, God will find another way to save the Jews, but you will perish. Who knows whether God has made you queen for just this reason?" Esther sent back her answer: "Gather all the Jews in Susa and fast for 3 days and nights. My maidens and I will fast also. Then I'll go to the king. If I die, I die." On the 3rd day, Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the king's house. When King Xerxes saw Esther, the sight pleased him, and he held out the golden scepter in his hand, saving her life. Esther drew near and touched the top of the scepter. "What brings you, Queen Esther? What do you need?" "It will be given to you, even to half the kingdom." "If it seem good unto the king, let him and Haman come this day to a banquet I have prepared for him." "Bring Haman quickly, that he may come as Esther has said." So the king and Haman came to her banquet. Once there, King Xerxes said, "What do you wish, Queen Esther?" "If it please the king, and I have found favor in his sight, then let the king and Haman come to the banquet I prepare tomorrow." Haman left Esther's banquet feeling great, but when he saw Mordecai at the gate, he was filled with hatred. He told his wife and friends what had happened. They said, "Build a gallows 75 feet high and ask the king to have Mordecai hanged on it." This made Haman really happy again, so he had the gallows built. That night the king could not sleep, so he had his records read to him. When he heard the account of Mordecai saving his life, he said, "What was done to reward him?" "Nothing." "Are any of my officers around?" "Yes, Haman." "Have him come in." Haman had just arrived to ask the king to hang Mordecai, but before Haman had a chance to speak, the king said, "What shall be done for the man the king wants to honor?" Haman thought the king wanted to honor him, so he said, "Let this man wear the king's royal robe and crown and ride the king's horse. Let one of the king's most noble princes dress him and lead him on horseback through the city, saying, "The king is honoring this man." King Xerxes said, "Hurry, do this for Mordecai the Jew. Don't skip any of your suggestions." So Haman had to lead Mordecai through the city. Afterwards, he went to Esther's second banquet. There the king said, "What is it you wish, Queen Esther?" Esther said, "If I have found favor, my king, please save my life and the life of my people. If we'd only been sold as slaves, I wouldn't have bothered the king, but we've been sold to be destroyed. Who dares do this? A foe and an enemy, this wicked Haman." Haman was terrified. The king was so enraged he stormed out into the garden. Haman begged for his life before Esther, but the king returned, saw him, and said, "What? Does Haman attack Esther with me in the house?" The guards covered Haman's face and carried him off. The king said, "Hang him!" So they hanged Haman on the gallows he had built for Mordecai. Esther told the king that Mordecai was her cousin. The king gave Mordecai his signet ring of authority that Haman had used. The king had Mordecai dressed in royal blue and white and given a golden crown to wear. King Ahasuerus couldn't take back the letters sent out by Haman, but he let Mordecai write letters that allowed the Jews to gather together and defend themselves. The princes of the country joined the Jews to fight against their enemies, and the Jews won. Mordecai's fame grew greater and greater. He became second only to King Ahasuerus. Mordecai ordered the yearly feast of Purim begun to remember Esther's bravery and God's providential power to save.
Let us sing the books of Moses, of Moses, of Moses. Let us sing the books of Moses, for he wrote the law. First Genesis, second Exodus, third Leviticus, fourth Numbers, and the fifth is Deuteronomy, the last of them all. Let us sing the books of history, of history, of history. Let us sing the books of history. There's 12 books in all. There's Joshua and Judges and the story of Ruth. Then 1st and 2nd Samuel and 1st and 2nd Kings. Then 1st and 2nd Chronicles, which gives us the records. Then Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther the queen. Let us sing the books of poetry, of poetry. poetry. Let us sing the books of poetry. There's 5 books in all. Job the patient, Psalms of David, and the Proverbs of the wise men, and then Ecclesiastes and the Song of Solomon. Let us sing the major prophets, major prophets, major prophets. Let us sing the major prophets. There's 5 books in all. Isaiah, Jeremiah, who wrote Lamentations, then Ezekiel and Daniel, who were true to their God. Let us sing the minor prophets, minor prophets, minor prophets. Let us sing the minor prophets. There's 12 books in all. Hosea to Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk, Zephaniah,